Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. I am glad that you guys can join me today. As I always say, I guess I open it up every show. You could be anywhere. So I deeply appreciate that you guys are here under this voice. I hope you guys are having a really good day this morning, evening, afternoon, depending upon where you are, actually, right? Just kind of 4:20 somewhere, I suppose, as they always say. And they mean that in the literal sense, right? There's always 4 o'clock somewhere. But no, I'm glad that you guys can join me. And this has been an interesting news weekend, to put it mildly. There's a lot of big news that has been bubbling up over the course of the weekend that we definitely have to get to. I'm not going to be able to get to it all in one show. Tomorrow's show, I'm going to be able to get to some of it. But nevertheless, let's start. Let's plow in. Shout out to the chat. Thank all of you for joining me. Thank all of you for being here. And for the chat to come, we've already hit, 1:30? Within 5 minutes. We've been doing really good with these shows, and our numbers have been going up. And I want to thank all of you for doing that. That's not me and something I can do by myself. That's something that all of you are kind of instrumental in taking place. So thank you all. We are nearly at 60K. Think about that. We've hit 6,000, I think, something like that. I haven't looked at the number, but we're near 60K. So let's keep going. Let's hit that 60K, then that 70K, then 80K, then 100K. I want the YouTube thing where I can put it on the back when I hit that 100K. So every time the show comes up, it is well known that all of us are at 100,000. Let's get to the news, because there's big news. I want to start with what will be a significant story going forward, but as the impact yet, because of what else took place over the weekend. So Witkoff gave the proposal, Iran nuclear deal proposal. Now they've had 5 talks, and after the 5 talks, Witkoff finally came out and says, okay, and for the first time wrote down a proposal to Iran. Now, as I pointed out to you, the things that the U.S. has been saying has been somewhat outlandish in regards to what they've been asking for. They've been asking for something that they know right off the bat was a red line. That Iran said, we're not giving up our enrichment. That's the issue of sovereignty. I had Marandi go on yesterday, thank him for staying on for like an hour and 15 minutes, even though he was only supposed to be on for 30 minutes. No, that was not planned. It was just, in having a conversation with him, he was bringing up things that I kind of wanted to get across and cross off my list to discuss. But as he pointed out, we are at a crisis point, and we were always going to hit this crisis point. Now, the catch becomes, what was in the proposal? And that was the question that I asked Marandi. Did he know? And he didn't necessarily know what was in the proposal. All right. My thing was the proposal different than what Trump had been saying up to this point? Because if you remember, what started off as an issue of enrichment turned into the Libyan model, based upon the people who were around Trump, the last person in the room. And then it turned into also, you are supporting terrorism, and we don't want you to support terrorism. Now, this is, drop dead shocking, the level of hypocrisy that a man could bear. It is Herculean in the level of mendacity and the level of hypocrisy for a person to be able to even utter such and not get struck by lightning. My grandfather used to say, if I'm lying, God, strike me dead. Now, he used to always lie. God never used to get involved. On this one, you would have thought maybe God would get involved. The notion that Donald Trump is in Saudi Arabia shaking the hand of a literal head chopper while simultaneously complaining that Iran is back at terrorism is profound. The notion that Donald Trump is murdering civilians or was murdering civilians in Yemen, bragged about it on Twitter, put it in the Department of Defense video, no less, and is talking about terrorism is, again, profound. The idea that we've given 80% of Israel's murder spree in regards to its genocide, to which they were burning kids alive and recently shooting at starving people, again, is profound. So if this is the line of logic that you're going with, I have to come to the assessment that you're not really serious about a peace deal, and that you are assuming and that you've already decided upon a course of action. Now, the U.S. is trying to pretend as if there's some kind of distance between itself and Israel. I don't buy that premise. I just don't. I told you I was skeptical about it all the way through for the last several months. I'm even more skeptical about it now. So we will see what happens going forward. The other thing that took place over the weekend, we have time. Ukraine, boo oucher. I'm going to call it a boo oucher. When we used to play chess at the barbershop, sometimes a move is made and it seems very strong. And you're like, whoa, I didn't see that. That caught me off guard. That move seems strong. But then when you look at it more closely, less so. We used to call those boo ouchers. And the reason we used to call them boo ouchers is because an oucher is something that actually hurts. Boo oucher is kind of like a ghost. Boo oucher. Ukraine was able to score a hit on Russia yesterday in multiple ways. One, terrorism in regards to the railways, where it attacked like 3 or 4 different railroad tracks, blowing up several, killing and injuring several people in the process. That was just terrorism. The second one was a drone strike all across Russia at the various air bases, including on some of the nuclear assets on those Russian airfields, specifically talking about bombers. Now, 2 of those, I don't believe, went anywhere. Russia was effectively, 1 blew up before it even got to where it was supposed to go. In the other cases, you had a truck. The truck was driven to a certain location. As the truck stopped, the drone starts flying out of the truck and attacking military planes, bombers in Russia. And these were even considered, including deep strikes into Russia. I think at one point, one even went to Siberia or something. So initially, people online were reporting, oh my God, 40 planes taken out by the Ukraine. 40 planes. Devastating. And then when the dust settled, it looked like it was about 8 or 9. Now, Russia has a fleet of hundreds of these planes. So 8 or 9 is bad. No, it shouldn't have happened. Yes, it's a security breach. But if you look at what has happened simultaneously, Russia has been expanding and speeding up the pace at which it's been advancing and the number of kills it's been getting against Ukraine. I mean, over the last week, I think it's been like 4,000. Let's say Russia's inflating the number, 3,000. Okay, that compared to you taking out a few planes, which one is more devastating? You tell me. So don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not minimizing it. And maybe I am on some level, but I'm trying to put it in proper context. A few things on that. I put on Twitter that this was good. This was good. And I know that may be a bit controversial as a point of view, but I want to explain why I'm saying this is good that it happened. One, this is a war. These are military targets. They're fair game. Whereas going after the train is just terrorism. Going after the planes, a fair game. Can't complain that that's terrorism. You got caught with your pants down. Hence, you got hit. It is a war. Start acting like it. 2, Russia's getting complacent. And what I mean by getting complacent, all of this talk about we're winning, we won, this war is over with and everything else. The war is not over with until your opponent dies or until your opponent stops fighting. That is when the war is over with. Up until that point, you are directly involved in a military conflict where they're trying to kill your people and you're trying to kill theirs. It's very clear. Stop acting and being complacent. 3, all of these people who are on Twitter, and I'm not even going to name them, but people who are in independent media and whatnot, who are saying that Trump should pick up the phone and call Putin, just shut up. Just shut up. I'm sorry. And I don't mean that brutally, but you're not helpful. Just be quiet. Truth of the matter is that for all of this talk about Trump or Putin is playing Trump, and that there's a propaganda exercise taking place between Ukraine and Russia because everybody understands that they don't necessarily want talks. And so they're trying to maneuver Trump. Trump is not a mediator. He is a belligerent to this conflict. He is actively giving money, intelligence, support, etc., for Ukraine to kill Russians. Somewhere along the way, many people in social media has taken the Kool-Aid, has drunk the liquid and consumed the pills into this belief that Donald Trump is somehow an actual mediator. When Donald Trump put out his peace plan, and by the way, I've evolved on this. I was the one that was open to see what Trump came out with. And what did he come out with? A nonsense plan that had no chance of getting over the finish line because it was utterly ludicrous. Losers and the people who are losing don't get to dictate terms. And if you are putting out a plan that claims that U.S. troops should be able to be on Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, then you are not being serious. I don't know if you're too incompetent to know that you're not being serious or whether you're just not being serious. Either way, you're not being serious. When Hegseth goes to Europe and say, hey, you need to pick up the pieces because we need to pivot to China, so you guys need to deal with the Russians. Okay, well, that doesn't sound like you're trying to create a sustainable peace. That sounds like you're trying for a diversification of resources. So for all of this attempts by Putin to not get the lesson from Minsk 1 and 2, to not get the lessons from Istanbul agreements, for him to try to play Western media to get a positive headline, or for that matter, to get one of the belligerents to the conflict, the primary instigator and the primary proponent that keeps the conflict going, to try to win him over to your side. Just stop. Just stop. It's a pointless endeavor. I would even go so far as to say it's a ridiculous endeavor at this point. And for all of those people who are saying, well, Trump should pick up the phone and call Putin. For what? What is he supposed to say on the phone? Hey, man, I didn't know anything about it. For one, I don't believe it. Two, whether it's true or not is irrelevant. Obviously, there was Western help involved in that plan. And fact of the matter is, Trump, again, is belligerent. He's party to the conflict. So for those people who are like, Trump should pick up the phone and call Putin to do what? To get Putin to lessen his response, to lessen the retaliation? And why do you believe that's in Russia's interest to lessen the retaliation? What you should be saying is what I'm saying here, is that Russia should stop fucking around, full stop, and should prosecute the war with a savage intensity in order to get this war over with. The reality of it is the Trump administration, even though they've moved a bit on this notion that this is a stalemate, still goes along with the idea of, well, this can only end in negotiations. No, it can't. No, that's not true. That's not true at all. Russia has been fighting this war with one arm tied behind his back. And recently, for the longest time, it's been trying to gain America favor, again, a belligerent. And if you don't believe me, look at RT. This nonsense that RT is putting out, trying to distance Trump from what is happening, either in regards to this attack that took place or in regards to where Trump is just left out of the loop. They're doing that to create distance between Trump and what Trump's proxy is doing. That's not helpful. Nor is trying to get Putin to stay his hand helpful. What is helpful is to prosecute this war with a savage intensity to end this war. It's a war. You need to finish it. Full stop. Get rid of this restraint nonsense. The longer you allow this to take place and this war to drag on and to drag on, the drag on is more, and the longer you allow NATO to get the opportunity to hit Russia at a distance under this fig leaf of we're not involved, when everybody knows they're involved. Meaning these attacks can only take place, A, because of complacency, and two, because Russia has used so much restraint in the prosecution of this war that it is dragged on and on and on. And considering that NATO wants this war to drag on and on and on, I don't see how this is a successful strategy. If Putin really indeed is trying to stay his hand and they're trying to limit the military activity of the Russian military in order to get favorable headlines or in order to get Donald Trump to like him better or to believe that it's Zelensky that's the one that doesn't want terms, that is a fool's errand. The notion that you are telling people, meaning social media, that Russia should believe its enemy in any kind of phone conversation is nonsense. It's nonsense. Russia needs to be more proactive in prosecuting this war. It's that. And what you should be saying on your social media channels, if indeed you want this thing to be over with, is prosecute the war. Not have Trump call Putin and try to con him into not having a response, or con him into lessening the response, or having Trump to say, hey, bro, I'm sorry, I didn't know anything about it. You ready for my ceasefire now? Truth of the matter is, for all of this talk about Russia maneuvering Trump to get him in a position where he may walk or pull support, what it seems like is that Russian restraint is something that Trump, or let's say the administration, is playing Putin for. The notion that Donald Trump in every situation can say, well, I didn't know anything about it, or I didn't know anything about it. And then when Russia is attacked, he's blissfully unaware. But when Russia attacks, he knows chapter and verse. How's this sustainable? Why do you care about headlines coming out of the West? Why do you care at this point, considering what is taking place and considering that NATO is effectively using Ukraine as an ability and a way to accomplish its objectives, either going after strategic nuclear assets, going after railroads, all of these things for the sole intent of prolonging the war? I'm saying the restraints need to come off. Strategic centers or command centers, fair game. Railroads, fair game. Decision-making centers, fair game. Electricity grid, fair game. All of those things are fair game. Any quasi-factory that is producing anything dealing with military, fair game. The Reshnik needs to come off the shelf. I'm saying that in order for Russia to get what it wants in regards to a deal, the way it's going about it is not the way to do it. If Donald Trump is going with this belief set, what time is it? If Donald Trump is going along with this belief set that, well, the only way this can end is through negotiations, well, the only way you would come to that assessment is if you have this belief that these things are somehow a stalemate, or that Russia is not moving along the fronts, or that they're not dominating. Then in order to change the context, you need to dominate. You need to dominate clearly, and dominate clearly in a way where it is shockingly and brimingly clear to even your worst enemy that you are not just winning, that your sole objective is to force an unconditional surrender. Under that model, you are more inclined to at the very least change the context in the way that people are seeing it, where you may be able to get a deal in that situation. But under this model, under this assessment, J.D. Vance said it himself. He was like, well, Russia wants too much. Do they now? Russia thinks they're winning and they want too much. Oh, they think they're winning. That needs to change to they are definitively winning. They are definitively crushing the opposition. They are savagely, brutally going after an unconditional surrender. And if indeed the military collapses, or if indeed you are now finding a willing partner at the other end of the table because you've demonstrated dominance to such a magnificent degree that it is unassailable, then you make it your deal. The way this is going, however, is not the way it works. And you are leaving your people out there and allowing these hits on your country. I'm sorry, give me 1 second. Oh, Jesus Christ. All right, so it seems like my guest will not be joining us this morning unless she can figure out how to use StreamYard. Okay. All right. So We have time to talk about other issues because I don't know if she's going to be able to join me. She is apparently having difficulty using StreamYard. I don't know why she's having difficulty using StreamYard, but sometimes it happens. That sucks. So it was former foreign minister of Austria, Karin Knessel. I really wanted her on the show because she knows many of the people in Europe that are in power. And I wanted to get her take on why Europe is going down this fool's errand. Because, look, truth of the matter is, and I don't know if Ukraine has become aware of this or not, that the rationale for Europe to push Ukraine to keep fighting has nothing to do about Ukraine. All of these people who are waving the flags, all of these people who are saying Ukraine is great, oh my God, the Russians, et cetera, et cetera. Those people, yes, there's some useful idiots, fair enough. But from the standpoint of the leadership of Europe, and even from the standpoint of the Donald Trump administration, which is why I keep making this point, Trump is not giving up this idea of hegemonic control of the globe. He's diversifying resources because we've overextended ourselves, and he wants to go into other arenas while allowing what he considers to be vassals to cover another part of the battlefield. So what Europe wants is, we want Ukraine to keep fighting. We want them to bog the Russians down. We want them to fight for as long as possible. If they can fight for 3 years, even better. At that point, we would have drained Russia of resources, manpower over the course of those 3 years. And while we are draining them of resources, we can build up our own military stocks, our own military factories, our own, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, whether they can do this or not is secondary to the point that that's what they want. And it is what they want to try to do, at least on paper, in the way that they're thinking about it. There are all sorts of political reasons why that may not necessarily work. Not just political reasons why that may not necessarily work, even financial reasons why that may not necessarily work. Not to mention that public may take issue with this idea of feeding Europeans to the Russians, which is what would effectively take place. So whereas the US is saying, hey, we want to leave this arena, it's not we want to leave this arena, take our ball and go home. It's we want to leave this arena and leave Europe with the ball in order to handle this theater while we deal with the other theater in China, because we can't deal with China and Russia simultaneously, and we've already overextended ourselves. Hence, Hegseth lunatic, insane speech that took place, I believe, over the weekend in Singapore. So this idea that Trump is somehow fighting the swamp, that Trump is somehow accepting a multipolar world, nonsense. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's not even apparent that that's what he's doing. And the only thing you have to do is look at what the administration is doing. Trump could have walked in this war. He didn't do that. He didn't just walk. He could have said, this is Joe Biden's war, I'm done. He didn't do that. That's not what he's doing. When he gave a peace deal, he could have gave a peace deal that recognized facts and realities on the ground and told Europe, accept this or I'm out. When Europe would have no capacity at all to do anything about maintaining the war effort. Again, he did not do that. That's not what he did. He is supporting the war effort currently. The US intelligence has been ensconced in Ukraine for decades. And this was true under the Trump administration. This was true under the Obama administration. And it is true now. These attacks that are taking place are coming from the Brits, and intelligence is taking place, and intelligence that they're getting from the United States. So I just want to be very clear about this. Trump is belligerent. He is a party to this war. He is not a mediator. The notion that people are saying they should pick up the phone and call Trump is nonsense. And Putin is nonsense. Nonsense. What is Putin really supposed to say in that phone conversation? Hey, Donald, yeah, man, now that I've talked to you, I realize you're such a credible and trustworthy figure. So I am going to stay my hand in this process. Really? Is that what you want him to do? Is that what you think is in the best interest of the Russian population? Is that really what you think that's in his best interest in a political sense, from a population who, again, is probably more in line with Medvedev as opposed to somebody who's more in line with, I don't know, some random peacenik in America that wants Trump to call Putin and con him into not responding? The response should be withering. It's not that what took place was overtly damaging to the war effort. It's not that. It's not that it was this overwhelming attack in the context of what the Russians are doing. For example, there are articles coming out right now from Germany in Die Zeist, and I may be woefully mispronouncing that. And there's another one, Bild, and another one, Berliner Zeitung. They seem to be very down on this idea of Ukraine's and their war effort. And there seems to be a panic that is in the Ukrainian military at what they see as an overwhelming offensive that is about to come over the horizon. And what they're seeing is that Russia's building up two different militaries, or two additional militaries. Those militaries are full of new equipment. That Russia, for the most part, even though they've been fighting this somewhat restrained, they have, what, a 1 million-man military at this point, with 300,000 additional soldiers that are fresh, that are being trained, and can enter the battlefield at any particular moment. What they see is a pressure campaign that has taken place on the entire front line that they have been incapable of doing anything about. And for the most part, well, they've been losing ground faster and losing manpower faster. In this article, yeah, she's not coming. I'm assuming she's not coming. So let's keep it moving. Exclusive report from Ukraine. The Russians are coming. We have little chance. Berliner Zeitung. Now that is behind a paywall, but Slaviangrad has various quotes from that particular article, and this article also has quotes from it. It says, exclusive report from Ukraine, the Russians are coming, we have a little chance. And that is effectively what some of the soldiers are saying. It's a pessimism in German media. It turns out that Russia, which is running out of both cannons and soldiers and toilets for a few years now, quote, is moving forward faster and faster on all fronts, according to German experts. Quote, Ukraine is unable to stop this attack. The superiority of the Russian force and infantry is becoming increasingly evident on the battlefield. The ranks of Ukrainian defenders are, quote, noticeably thinning. Reinforcements are in short supply, as are weapons, ammunition, and proper leadership. That is coming from a NATO country. That is not coming from me. That is not coming from our team. I'm saying that they see it on the battlefield. It is something that they are perfectly aware of. I understand that some people will see that and say, well, dude, the Russian plan is working, right? This war of attrition, even though it may be taking several years, seems to be bearing fruit. And I also know, I think it was Mearsheimer that pointed out, the Ukrainian military is going to collapse, and it's going to collapse sooner than what people realize. That may or may not be true. Fair enough. I'm saying even the propaganda victory is too much, especially considering you have a population that sees that, feels some kind of way about those planes getting taken down. You had people who were on the truck trying to use their bare hands to stop the drones from flying out. It was astonishing, just astonishing. Throwing rocks and whatnot, trying to stop the drones from going after the airplanes. Now, part of the issue is that these were part of Russia's strategic nuclear deterrent, which is why this is such a big deal. And you can imagine why this is also such a sultry dish for NATO. I don't know if sultry works in that. A decadent dish for NATO, meaning the balls of NATO to wage war on Russian soil, going after their strategic assets, which is something that obviously NATO will want to go after, is pretty astonishing. And there's a level of seriousness that needs to be instilled as this war proceeds. And they don't take Putin serious. Everything that has been done from the standpoint of pragmatism has been seen purely as weakness. I am not saying go after civilians. I am not saying go kill a lot of people. I am not saying that at all. What I'm saying is this war needs to be prosecuted with the seriousness that it deserves. And complacency, or for that matter, pretending as if Donald Trump is somehow a friend, a mediator, or anything other than a belligerent, is a fool's errand. Trying to get the U.S. to like you better is a fool's errand. Trying to get a positive headline in the United States as if the U.S. papers or any of these papers in the West are going to be fair to you is a fool's errand. prosecute your war. Full stop. It's just that. It's just that. I just don't understand these people who are like, hey man, Trump should pick up the phone and call Putin. Why? Why? What do you expect? What do you think is happening with that? Nothing. Why do you think it is in the best interest of Russia to somehow have a conversation with Trump and then moderate their response as if they are a vassal or under the thumb of U.S. interest? Why do you think that? And yet, this is what you got all through social media by people who call themselves analysts and people who are supposed to be independent analysts at that. It's weird. It's utterly bizarre. Just stop. Just stop. Actually, speaking of Ritter, so Ritter, God, man, and I don't want to, I have zero issue with Ritter. I'm saying that now. I'm saying it flat out. I have zero issue with Ritter. There's no feud, there's no argument, there's no anything. I just want to make it very clear. I take issue with some of his takes. It's just that, that's all. He tends to be bombastic, and bombastic in a way that seems to be detached from reality. Again, I'm not taking a shot at him specifically, I'm talking about his point of view. That was true with the Iran issue, where he took this neocon perspective that America is America, Iran is Iran, so if America tells Iran what to do, then Iran should just do it or else. Okay, that's pretty outrageous. That's pretty outrageous. Under that motto, you can tell Iran to do anything. Hey, give up your nukes, give up your ballistic missiles or else. And then what would Ritter be on TV saying? Well, America is America, Iran is Iran. If that's what America is telling you to do, then that's what you should do. It's nonsense. It's a slippery slope argument under this model that Iran should somehow give up sovereignty for protection, as if the moment that you give up sovereignty, your ability to protect yourself goes along with it. It's nonsense. Ritter comes out with this article. Now, I saw him on, I think it was Danny's show. On that show, he was right. He pointed out that there was no way for this government under Trump to be able to effectuate a deal. He is perfectly right. And it should be obvious, either with Iran, either with Hamas, or for this matter, with the nonsense that they're putting out in regards to a plan. And it kind of goes back to my point. Until it is brimingly clear that you are dominating to such a dominant, overwhelming degree that the West can no longer come up with this nonsense that, well, it must be a peace proposal to end the conflict, then your chances of actually getting a proposal are nil. You're going to get these ridiculous plans that Trump is coming out with. Here's a 22-point plan in order to end the war. Okay, this is nonsense. This is a plan in order to freeze the conflict, just like Syria was a frozen conflict, that the next administration, or at the most inopportune time, it can spring back up. There's also something else with that. I strongly suspect, before I go into the Ritter thing, I strongly suspect that from Putin's point of view, this mission is philosophical. It's not just ethical and legal in the way that I have an ethical legal responsibility to defend Mother Russia. It's not just that. I strongly suspect that this is on my watch, and I'm going to solve this on my watch. I'm not handing this off to somebody else that may F this up. I and my team are going to deal with this, and we're going to deal with it now. Even if we have to shoot one Ukrainian in the face to do it, even if we have to fight NATO to do it, I am going to solve this now. Now, the trick is to be able to thread your way through it without getting into a larger conflict with NATO. And up to this point, Putin has been successful in doing that. Somebody like me would have been in a war with NATO right now. So fair enough. But I strongly suspect that in a way that Americans don't fully get, because we don't trust our leaders on this stuff, and oftentimes they're going into wars for craven reasons. These aren't just war; these are just wars of choice that America gets involved in. That we don't quite get on a gut level what it means to take on the responsibility of defending a country and defending a territory. Whereas in his case, because he is in that spot, because they have a history of the First and Second World War, where their country was invaded through Ukraine, no less, multiple times, even go back to Napoleonic Wars, that tradition, that need to fight, to defend yourself from existential wars is ever present in a way that we don't get. I strongly suspect that he has taken this as a mission, almost as a messianic mission. And I don't mean it in the lunatic Zelensky sense. I mean it in the, this is my country, I'm going to defend my country. The barbarians are at the gates. I didn't want this war. This war was thrust upon us, but damn it, I'm going to finish this war, and I'm going to ensure the integrity and the safety of my country for when I am not here. Whereas from the US point of view, we need to freeze this conflict. We need to pause this. Putin is not going to be there forever. And at some point, we will find somebody who will make bad choices or worse choices than what Putin is doing, or somebody maybe we can influence, or maybe at a more inopportune time for Russian government, meaning for them, Putin is a problem. And on some level, they accept he's a problem, and a problem that they can't necessarily solve or get rid of through military or economic means. And so if you can freeze the conflict until there's no longer a Putin, then your chances of trying to get something done may be better in the future, as opposed to trying to get it done now, where obviously it's not going to get done. I mean, that airfield attack, put it in perspective. It puts me in mind of the Avengers when Iron Man is fighting Thanos. Yes, that's how my mind works, I'm sorry. And Iron Man does all of this fantastic stuff. I mean, he is like at the limits of his skill and capability. And the best he can do is cut Thanos on his face. And Thanos like, all that for a drop of blood. That's what it's kind of like. They spent a year and a half planning this attack, a year and a half. And in that year and a half, we're supposed to expect that the US knew nothing about it, that Trump knew nothing about it, for something that took a year and a half to plan. And the best that you were able to get was about 9 planes. How do you replicate that? Meaning, even if I accept it was a success, and it was on some level a success, propaganda-wise and reality-wise, how do you replicate that? And considering that the thing that you did was take down planes, this is not even necessarily a body count. So you spent all of that time to plan something, and the best that you can do is take down 8 planes out of a fleet of like 200. How's that sustainable? How's that sustainable? That is a lot for that muffler. That's all I'm saying. Which add more credence to this idea that obviously the US knew. I don't buy for a moment that Trump didn't know. It is pretty, it's not coincidental, the word I'm looking for. It's pretty rich that in every situation, Trump is either unaware, uninformed, doesn't read, or for that matter, just was not told. Isn't that convenient? Isn't that convenient? So going back to Ritter for a moment, Ritter playing with fire. Ukraine's Operation Spiderweb is called Cross the Threshold when it comes to triggering a Russian nuclear response. How Russia and the United States respond could determine the fate of the world. Now, I read the article. This first line set me off a bit. Ukraine's Operation Spiderweb is, and by the way, Operation Spiderweb was the name of it. Operation Spiderweb has crossed the threshold when it comes to triggering a Russian nuclear response. And I thought to myself, is he trying to say that Russia is going to respond in nuclear means? Now, it's true that Russia's updated the nuclear doctrine. Oh, you didn't see it. It's true that Russia's updated the nuclear doctrine. That part is true. It is true also that Russia has effectively said, look, an attack, depending upon what that attack is, and if that attack is coming from, let's say, NATO forces, whether it's nuclear or not, can create a nuclear response just for what the attack is. That is also true. But this line comes across as if he's trying to imply that there's going to be some kind of nuclear response. Ukraine's Operation Spiderweb has crossed the threshold when it comes to triggering a Russian nuclear response. No, it hasn't. It hasn't. That's ludicrous. The notion that they take out 9 planes, even though those planes deal with strategic nuclear assets, and that the response of Russia is going to somehow be nuclear is ludicrous. And this is the same thing when it came to the Iran issue, where Scott was making this argument that the US was somehow going to nuke Iran in an unprovoked nuclear attack. Again, this seems outlandish to me. Yeah, it's good to sell, or get people to read the article, but in reality, less so. For one, it gives the people who are doing this stuff exactly what they want, which is an overreaction. There's that. 2, Russia has missiles below the nuclear threshold that are devastating, meaning you don't even need to go to nukes. The Oreshnik by itself is a terrifying weapon that is not a nuke, that burns nearly at the temperature of the sun. So the idea that you need to have a nuclear response for something because of drones seems outlandish. Then when you read the article, he's not really saying that. When you go into the article, he's saying something a little different. His argument in the article is effectively, we are whistling past the graveyard. And if stuff like this keeps going on, where the war keeps continuing, and it keeps continuing, and NATO gets more desperate and more brash, then we could reach a point where this devolves into a nuclear conflict. Look at what's taking place in the Baltic, for example. You have Estonia, of all places, working with other NATO countries in order to try to go after Russian ships, in which case Russia nearly fired on one of those ships if that ship wasn't going to stop going after one of its cargo. Meaning you had an airplane that came out of the blue that was going to light the Estonian ship up if it didn't leave that Russian ship to its devices. Meaning you're getting closer and closer of this notion of rubbing edges to the point where there could be an attack. Look at the Taurus missile issue. I'm of mind that Germany has already given the Taurus missiles to Ukraine. I don't really care what the German government says. And if indeed the German government, or let's say Ukraine, fires one of those missiles at Moscow, I strongly believe that all logic in the world demands that Russia hits the place where that missile came from or where that place was manufactured in Germany. Whether that provokes a larger war with NATO is irrelevant. It has to be irrelevant. Because if that's your model, where your argument is, well, we don't want to provoke a larger war with NATO, so NATO can do pretty much anything, that is a problematic take. Because what that means is they can put troops in Ukraine, because again, what are you going to do if you can't attack NATO because you're scared of triggering a larger war? You can get hit, Storm Shadows and all of these other missiles on Russian cities, meaning the moment that you allow one to hit one of your cities without a response, you've just allowed 20 to hit your cities without a response. You're forced by the logic of the event to respond. Now, Germany seems to have gotten the hint and have at the very least acknowledged, okay, we don't want to get hit. So what we would do is help build those in Ukraine and let Ukraine do it. Okay, you can do that. At the very least, those are factories that are going to get lit up at the first opportunity when those things are going to get built. I have a hard time believing those factories are going to be finished at all before those things get destroyed. I'm trying to point out that Ritter is not wrong in this. That the longer this, and again, this goes back to my original point, get this shit over with, prosecute this war and get it over with. The longer this goes on, the more of a chance you have for either an accident or some rando goofball that believes the Russians are bluffing. So let's push it further. And we all end up in a larger catastrophic situation. So yeah, the headline for it is outlandish. The article itself is correct. See, I'm fair when it comes to Ritter. I don't take issue with Ritter at all. It's just the bombastic stuff can be a bit outlandish at times. All right, so let's go to something else. We hit the Russian thing, and we hit it pretty hard. This is going to be... Okay, fair enough. Fair enough, fair enough, fair enough, fair enough, fair enough, fair enough. Give me 1 second. Okay, I do understand. I just lost a guest. I know I just lost a guest. Karin Knessel, and I say it that way because she corrected me on the pronunciation at one point. Very interesting guest. Very knowledgeable about the topics that are associated with Europe. Complicated personality. I just say it that way. She's very Austrian. Yeah, I just said it that way. Apparently her browser wasn't capable of using StreamYard. I don't know why that wouldn't just push you to use another browser. I'm not getting into it. I appreciate her being willing to come on. So that's, she's going to take issue with that. And I suspect I just lost a guess. That sucks. That's okay. We have two really good guests coming on today. We have Mark Sleboda, who's going to come on and have a discussion about this. I'm hoping that's not going to turn to a bit of a back and forth. Because I suspect that what Mark is going to say is, look, we're prosecuting the war. Even though this is a propaganda victory, Russia doesn't necessarily change its military doctrine for propaganda reasons. And so, you know, they're going to maintain what's working and keep moving with what's working. I just don't buy that logic. Let's go back to Iran for a bit to be more fleshed out with that. So this is going to be a big deal. And if it wasn't for, in fact, let's do this. Let's go to chat first, and then we'll bounce back to Iran. Flying boy, Vladimir Putin is useless and Russian military totally overrated. Well, I don't think Ukraine thinks that. I don't think Ukraine did that. Putin did the, same thing in Syria, and look what happened. But he didn't do the same thing in Syria. I mean, and see, it's comments like that is the exact reason why I say, stop fucking around. Get this war over with. Like, it's very possible that Russia is the strongest military in the world at this point. By the same token, they're fighting this war with one hand tied behind their back, and they've been doing it from the very beginning. That has led some, like Flying Boar here, to come with the assessment of the Russian military is overrated. Considering the dead Ukrainians that are laying face down in the battlefield, who had the largest military in Europe, with all the assistance of the US, all the European countries, I think they would disagree with you. Or at the very least, I think their deaths would disagree with you, and the scale of their deaths, not to mention the pace at which they're fighting the war. I think reality disagrees with you. Syria was different because they accepted a frozen conflict in Syria. For one, Syria is not Russia. Those are two different things. Two, they accepted a frozen conflict with the idea of Idlib remaining a terrorist haven with some belief in Erdogan that was found to be lacking, meaning they won the war, but they couldn't win the peace after the fact. What I think you're missing, though, is they remember that, which is part of the reason that you would never get a ceasefire and you would never get this frozen conflict that the United States effectively wants. They remember it. But if you think Syria is Russia, it's nonsense. Enough with Putin restraining, either toughen up or resign. No comment. I don't think he should resign. But insane. He is probably one of the strongest, most smartest leaders you'll find. But his pragmatism at times leads him astray. And I think Mark would say the same thing. Russians shouldn't send their kids to war because of hopelessness of Putin. He's willing to sacrifice Russians for what happens for appeasing the West. Oh. Appeasing is too strong. I thought that myself, appeasing. I think that might be too strong in the context of the European leaders going back to the Second World War, where you had the phony war for a while because they didn't necessarily want to, they kept giving it over to Putin. Also, to be fair, how I feel is brutal right now. So, Flambert, Bohr, I have a hard time overly criticizing what you're saying, but I do want to add context to it because there's a large reality to it. It is very possible that the concern from Russia, at the very least when they first got into the conflict, was they were ill prepared to fight the war when they started the war. But at a certain point, it became existential when it was this understanding that, hey, they're killing ethnic Russian Ukrainians, and at some point they're going to invade the East. And so on some level, I guess he felt pushed to respond. I don't know if they understood that they were going to be able to maintain their economic and militaristic or do as well as they thought they did, I don't know if they knew that in advance. Wars are unpredictable by definition. But they did do well. Economically, they remained stable, and militarily, they have effectively been decimating the Ukrainian military, even with the restraints that they've been placing on themselves. In peace negotiations, I don't believe for a moment that they think Trump is credible or trustworthy. I don't buy that at all. I don't buy it. I don't buy it 1,000 times. I don't buy it. What I do think, though, and I kind of agree with Mark, at least up to this point, that in their minds, if Trump walks, this war ends faster. Period. And so going through the motions of negotiations, going through the motions of talks, all of these things, whereas you may argue, are costing Russian lives, he would probably argue would save Russian lives if the US walks. Meaning the sooner this war is over with, the better. And if you're willing to, at the very least, try to engage in negotiations in the very beginning because you think you may have a partner on the other end, that is not a loss, especially if it turns out that you were right in being willing to have those talks, especially if the administration that's coming in is saying something different than the previous administration. And that is somewhat of a breath of fresh air when for the longest time, you've just been inundated with these lies and this nonsense and this propaganda, when finally the administration says NATO was the cause of the war. Thank you. Yes. Putin believes it's a proxy war. And yeah, I think he's kind of right. Okay, good. All of these things are true. And all of these things are relevant in a way that was never said for the last 3 years in the jingoism that was coming out of the Biden administration in Europe. Even me, I didn't know. Like, when my network ended, my thought was, all right, Trump wins, what happens? Meaning, I don't know. It's an open question about what happens. And so it's not insane to the very least give some level of openness to see what it looks like as it moves forward. At some point, of course, you say, okay, this is not started, this isn't working, and this is not necessarily in our best interest. But I'm trying to make the point to you, Flying Boar, that it's not wrong to at the very least try when it is unclear what the other person is offering. At the point where you realize the other person is offering nonsense, then you make another choice. Agreed. But he's not wrong for seeking negotiations, if indeed negotiations could have ended the conflict, and not just ended the conflict, would have saved Russian lives and come up with the new security architecture of Europe in a way that ensured the integrity and security of the state. That's not wrong. That's not a negative. I think what I take issue with more so is that when it becomes clear that that's not what's happening, then you need a different choice. So, Flying Boar, you've been a hard ass. Fair enough. I understand it. But I don't think you're entirely being fair. Alexander G. The Ziopaths, quote, continuity of government, unquote, but they don't have complete control. The sociopaths. I think you're saying sociopaths. Unless you mean Israel with xenopaths. I'm not quite sure which one you mean on that one. If your point is that Trump may not have known because he doesn't read, and because he doesn't read, and by the way, that's not just me saying that. Some of you may think, okay, you're being unfair. Take a look at this. Take a look at this. Think of how humiliating this is. Think of how humiliating this is. Putin speaks, what, 3 or 4 different languages? Xi Jinping, again, competent. Both governments competent. From the standpoint of the way the public looks at them, 80% approval rating for Putin's case, especially in the context of the war. Xi Jinping gets 80%, if not more, approval rating because of competence. Donald Trump, Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, wants to turn President Donald Trump's daily intel briefings into Fox News-type broadcasts because he doesn't read. He doesn't read. How are you making foreign policy choices? How are you putting your nose in any part of the world? How are you doing any of this stuff if you don't read? And I want to answer that, by the way. Gabbard is hoping to add animations and more dynamic multimedia elements to Trump's daily briefings. She needs to give him cartoons. The president needs cartoons because the president doesn't read. That is humiliating. That is humiliating. Here's the catch. Whether the president reads or not is irrelevant. The United States is not trying to understand other countries. It's not trying to understand the other country's point of view. Sociopaths don't really care about your point of view. They care about what they can get and what they're trying to accomplish. So I don't need to know your history. I don't need to know the mechanics of why you're doing what you're doing. I have an objective. I want to accomplish the objectives. That's all I care about. That's why the animations and everything else are irrelevant. Some people actually believe that Donald Trump wants to end the war. I think he would end it if it's on American terms, if that's what they mean. But again, that's a nonsense proposition, considering your team is on the brink of disaster. So, there's that. Alexander G. What I'm trying to say is we need to keep Trump accountable. We can't just resign to the notion the sociopaths have all control. Oh, I see. I don't give Trump a pass. I don't give Trump a pass. I've had people on the show that tries to continuously give him a pass. RT and Russian media is bending over backwards to try to act as if Donald Trump is out to lunch. Donald Trump is the president of the United States. The buck stops with him. I don't care who's around him. I don't care who's in the room. I don't care if he doesn't read. I don't care. 1,000 times I don't care. Trump is the president of the United States. Don't give me this shit that Zelensky took 1.5 years to come up with a plan of action, and Trump, because he doesn't read, was blissfully unaware. Irrelevant. It's irrelevant. Don't tell me that Donald Trump is only briefed on what happens when Ukraine acts, but not briefed when Russia acts, but not briefed when Ukraine acts. Again, irrelevant. I don't care. For one, I don't believe it. 2, Trump behaved this way in every context that he was in. Whether it was the deal with Hamas, where he makes the deal, then blames Hamas when Israel is the one that breaks the deal. Whether it's the Iran deal, where the deal continues to escalate, even though they start off with this premise that the issue is the amount of enrichment, then it becomes, well, you're supporting terrorists in the region. Oh, and your ballistic missiles. And now we need to also talk about the Libyan model of getting rid of everything, meaning he is a fundamentally untrustworthy actor and should be treated as such. And I get why Russian media is bending over backwards to try to absolve him of this. It's almost like they're trying to help him save face for their own audience. That is not my job. That's not my objective. They're becoming a trash outlet in the way that they are talking about Trump and on issues pertaining to Trump. There should be a heaping amount of criticism. Alexander, I agree with you entirely. A heaping amount of criticism. Either you're so incompetent, you don't know what your administration is doing, or Donald Trump is out to lunch and no longer has control of his administration. Meaning, the same way that those headlines are trying to absolve him of responsibility, you can also write those headlines in a way that criticizes the fact that he's incompetent. Alexander G, 1000% agree with you. The buck stops with him. The buck stops with him. Crown Heights Brainiac. Thank you, Crown Heights Brainiac. Having a difference of opinion. There we go. Good job. I want a difference of opinion. Having a difference of opinion is not a shot, Jamal. Accountability is accountability, and Ritter doesn't have thicker skin. He shouldn't be independent media. Oh, I see. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what's in his mind, and I don't know his motivation. Two things. As I told you before, anyone that does videos, commentary, or anything else has every right to not go on somebody's show. Full stop. Every right. Two, I don't know if that was the reason that Ritter stopped coming on. It could have just been, I'm doing this guy a favor. It could have just been that. Tired of doing the favor. It could have been, I'm doing this guy a favor, and when I do a video with him, 1,000 of the comments are trashing me for my commentary. Now, again, nobody said anything bad about Ritter as a person. It's his point of view that was problematic. So there's that. So I don't know. I don't know what was in his mind. I don't know his motivation. And whatever his motivation is, it could have been, I don't like his suit. That could be, that's reason enough. He's his own person. He makes his own choices. Yeah, I've never said anything bad about him. I've always appreciated the fact that he came on. Always understood that he was doing me a favor by coming on. If he goes on Judge Knapp, he's going to get, 200,000 views? He comes on my show and make it 30K, maybe 60K total in regards to 2 videos. So I get it. Like I said, there's no hard feelings. I'm being fair to him when I talk about him. Dina, Panteliokas, thank you. Thank you. And I'm sorry for butchering your name. Oh, here we go, Flambour. Wars are fought with 2 hands, not with 1 hand tied behind your back. It depends on the war. Dude, you're killing me on this because I kind of agree with you, but I think you're being a hard ass, even though I kind of agree with you. I think what Russia would say is it's a special military operation, it's not a war. I think that's what they would say. I agree with you on this. That's just what you call it. That's not what it is. Like, you can call it, a pepperoni pizza. That's what you can call it if you want. Still people dying and killing, right? And you are in a war that is the scale of, let's say, like the First World War. Like, it's not, a phony war. These people are dying to the tune of like 1 million people. That is extreme. Warfare is being redefined in this war. That is extreme. So you can call it Susie May. You can call it mushroom pizza. You can call it whatever you want. It is a war. I agree with you. And yes, it should be fought with 2 hands. It's a war. It's if you and I are playing chess, my job is to get the game over with as fast as I can. That's it. And some people will say, well, yeah, that's a one-dimensional way of looking at it. That is true. And if you are sitting in his space, you have other concerns that you need to be aware of. And those other concerns are, will NATO get involved into this war? It's that. Meaning, if I kill Zelensky, is NATO going to get involved? If I do X or Y, is NATO going to get involved? Now, that is a big concern at the beginning of the war. Now, it may still be a concern, but truth of the matter is, you may hit that bridge either way. And your advantage in materials your advantage in manpower, your advantage in manufacturing. All of those things are temporal, especially if you allow people who are not really part of it to expand their own capabilities while you are continuously fighting and draining down manpower, materials, etc. So, boy, I agree with you. I do. But if Putin could get out of this, see, a lot of stuff is going to be hindsight. If Putin could get out of this without being in direct conflict with NATO, then we could say he was right. He was right. If he ends up in direct conflict with NATO anyway, then you are right. There's no way to know in advance. We can say that they are gearing up for war. That's true. We can say that they are trying to marshal their people for some kind of conflict later, and it's feeding Ukraine in the way that the US would feed Europe to the Russians. That is true. But if I'm sitting where Putin is sitting, I may say the AfD in Germany may actually take power. I may say that Europe had to rip the mask off in regards to this notion of being liberal democracies or constitutional democracies or parliamentary democracies or whatever you want to call it, in order to go after Marine Le Pen, AfD, and for that matter, in Romania. In all three of those cases, they had to take extravagant action in order to decimate the will of the population. In Dune, maybe it was Dune. I don't remember which Frank Herbert book. Frank Herbert's a god. I swear to God, he's a god, or at the very least, he was a god. But he makes this point that bureaucracy is the best tool of control and domination that has ever been created. And his point is, if you can, in a machine-like way, subjugate a population with the patina that there is some kind of democratic process involved in it, then you have a much better form of dictatorship than having a direct dictatorship where people would just say you're a dictator. Look at Burkina Faso. Sahel states are a really good example of this. They have what they consider to be democracies. But are they really democracies? Like, what is the point of a democracy? Or what is the point of a government? In part, you want to ensure the integrity of the state. That's first and foremost, because if you can't ensure the integrity of the state, then you don't have the state and everything else becomes meaningless. But two, provide a platform for the population to be able to grow, develop, and respond to change, almost like it's an organism. And part of that is grow, develop, and create a platform for the population to be able to do those things. If the organization that you're coming up with is public and people rule, God bless you. You can have all sorts of arrangements. They have to be sustainable, and the energy has to be something that you can replicate over the course of time in a way that it doesn't eat itself. But is it really a democracy when you have a colonial power that effectively put into place something that allowed it to maintain some level of control and influence, with the patina of it being a democracy? It's like, sure, you can elect whatever leader you want, but at the end of the day, the leader that you elect is still going to be under the thumb of somebody else. Okay, well, that's not really the point. You may call it a democracy, but it's missing the fundamental point of what it is actually supposed to be. And so you get a military junta that effectively takes over and say, okay, we're done with this. We're done with this. This is not the way this is supposed to work. We're not prospering. We're not gaining. We're not doing any of these things that we're supposed to do. We are the richest, or one of the richest continents, and yet all of us are poor. That needs to stop, and it needs to stop now. Okay, so that is not people rule. That is not public rule. By the same token, the public backs him. And the public backs him because he's effectively effectuating the will of that public in a way that the quote-unquote democratic order wouldn't allow. The bureaucracy was a way of subjugating the population as opposed to liberating the population, whereas in this case, the junta is the liberation. Hope you get my point. Let's keep going. Let's keep going. What time is it? Okay, Mark is going to be here momentarily. Flambor, if the U.S. provide arms to Ukraine, then Russia should do the same. What, provide arms to Ukraine? 2 failed Minsk agreements, failed Istanbul Accord, anything left, you can't trust the West. Agreed. And I don't think they do. Crown Heights Brainiac, Trump used a pop-up picture that book intel brief while flying board needs to happen. Needs to see. Look, man, I get his angst. I was pissed when I saw that. I was pissed. And I was being brutal to people on Twitter, maybe more brutal than I should have been. I get where he's coming from. You're in a war. It's existential. And it's against all of NATO. And you have to deal with that, right? I get it. You have to thread a line. Fair enough. But it's unsatisfying. And I think what flying boards getting across is that it's unsatisfying. I think it's that. Mommy Rules, please try to get Andrei Martynov or Dmitry Orlov. I would love to have both of them on the show. I would love to have both. Whether they would love to come on is a whole separate matter. Raphael Ligoned Lepe, old man. Ciano. If the Security Council does not remove Putin in a very short time, Russia is making a big mistake. Putin is no longer the man for the job. Too nice. Oh, I don't buy that. I don't buy that. We fundamentally disagree on that one. I think truth of the matter is a hardliner would have ended up in a war with NATO, which is not the best outcome. I just don't believe it's the best outcome. I agree with you that he is more oriented to trying to get a deal, and maybe too much so. Agreed. I agree that I don't think he's prosecuted it with the viciousness it's deserved, considering all of the forces allied against him. Agreed. The U.S. has made this argument that if you're giving weapons over, then you're a target. Okay, but keep in mind there are consequences to that. Yeah, I don't know. I agree. I disagree with you on that. I think Putin is the man for the job. I just think this is a wake-up call, or at the very least it should be. May 30th, Biafra Remembrance Day, where we honor the heroes who fought to protect Igbo people from genocide committed by Nigeria. We lost 5 million people. Wow, these numbers. This is kind of what Lath talks about. Not specifically in this case, but what Lath points out, that it's not clean. Like, there's nothing in reality that prevents one group from subjugating another group or killing off a large number of that group, short of some kind of force to stop it. There could be moral force. It can be the contours of a particular society. It could be another country. But the reality of it is, in the way he talks about the Gazans, is that the only way through that was for blood to be spilled, and to be spilled in mass. And that there were other instances, conflicts, other zones around the world where millions have died. And I think you're pointing out one in particular. Wow. All right, how much time do we have? Okay, Marco's going to be on in one moment. The Iran deal is a big deal. The fact that the U.S. goes through 5 different talks, and instead of the U.S. honestly and legitimately giving an offer, by the way, that Iran was chomping at the bit to accept. If you remember, Pezeshkian in the very beginning was open to negotiations. You didn't have to threaten Iran. They were already there. In fact, the entire point of the enrichment was in order to create something that they can exchange in order to get the U.S. to effectively remove the sanctions and come to some level of a deal. Well, the U.S. being completely, using Israel as a rogue state, quote unquote, they went into negotiations without ever being honest brokers in those negotiations. Part of the issue as I pointed out to somebody who I was having a conversation with, is if you can't be honest about why you're doing this in the first place, then all of it is problematic, which is why I didn't necessarily believe these negotiations were earnest. For one, you're acting as if Iran is trying to get a nuke. If Iran wanted a nuke, it would have one by now. They're not trying to get a nuke, nor does the US believe they're trying to get a nuke. There's that. Two, they're a sovereign state. They can do whatever they want. And even in the context of the Non-Proliferation Act, that's not an issue for the United States. That's an issue for the IAEA, who itself is somewhat of a biased actor in this. But whatever. That's not an issue for the US. Three, Israel has nukes, over 100 from my understanding. And people are acting as if this is not the case. It is an open secret. Everybody knows they have nukes. They have nukes. They can end the world tomorrow. And so this idea that this religious maniac country has gone through and has killed hundreds of thousands of people, destroyed hospitals, burned people alive, that invaded one country after the next. And your issue is not with that country. Your issue is with Iran. Okay, that's weird, but not weird at all considering who the US is backing and what they want to affect in the region. I don't know if I'm on 3 or 4, but there's a context. There's a continuity that takes place among all of the administrations. So you get them taking out Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya. Sudan is a basket case. And now you have Iran, who's this man standing. So there's a context that can't be ignored that has gone through one president after the next, whether they were Democrat or whether they were Republicans. And that context has now found itself on Trump's lap, where you have an Israeli government that at this point full well believes that Trump is going to back him to the hilt. And that even if Trump wasn't looking for a war, that they would still back him if they do a strike and Iran responds. So the fact that the US hasn't been able to get a deal is not shocking. I'll put it that way. My man, Mark Sleboda, international relations security analyst. He also has his own Substack right now. Definitely check him out on Substack. And just to nail down the name of it, Realpolitik with Mark Sleboda, I believe is the name. Yep, Realpolitik with Mark Sleboda. The man is fantastic. He is one of the best analysts that are out there. You're not going to get him claiming that Russia is about to nuke Ukraine. You're not going to get him saying that the war is going to be over within 3 days. You tend to get really decent analysis from Mark. So Mark, you are the person I've been chomping at the bit to talk to. How you doing, man? You doing all right today?
Jamarl, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show. I'm alive. How are you? And my new The Realpolitik with exclusive content is on Boosty, which is a Russian version of Patreon to get around the Biden/Trump sanctions regime.
Wait, just be clear, it's Boosty.
Boosty. Yes. Everything is in English. Yes, it was created by Russians. It operates completely with financial systems around the world. Credit cards, banks. Whether in Russia or not. There's no. It lacks the problem with sanctions that anything that uses Stripe like Patreon or Substack or other outlets use. Yes.
Okay, I'll put that in the notes. Good to know. And I'm glad. Okay, good to know. God, those sanctions have been just, those things are a pain in the ass.
They are.
Mark, I am annoyed. Now, I'm going to explain why I'm annoyed, and I want to get your take on this. So, 2 things are happening at once. One, Russia is making faster progress on the battlefield. You have multiple German magazines that have effectively pointed this out, that quote unquote, the Russians are coming is one of the articles saying, basically, we can't do anything to stop them. We know they're coming. We know they're planning a larger offensive. We can't do anything to prevent this from taking place. The infantry is effectively overwhelming on the ground. And from my understanding, there have been thousands of Ukrainians that have been killed over the last week alone. And Russia's been expanding the pace at which they've been moving. So there's that. On the other side of it, you have what I call a boo oucher. And a boo oucher, as I explained to the audience, was a chess term. And it's a move that looks strong in the beginning, but the more you look at it, you realize, okay, that's not as strong as I thought it was. So Ukraine goes on a terrorist rampage, attacking multiple trains, Bryansk, I forget the other two, but you can give us an update on those. But they also planned, I guess, for 15 months for this kind of drone attack at various airfields throughout Russia, including hitting some of the nuclear assets in Russia, meaning the planes that were carrying nuclear missiles. Now, these were bombers that were hit. In the beginning, the report was 40, planes have been taken down. From my understanding, it's only been 9. Now, you can correct me on this if I'm wrong. Let's start there first. What do we know so far about the attack?
Okay, so first of all, there's 2 separate attacks, and I know we've talked about this before, and many times I have said that as the Kiev regime and its Western backers get more desperate, and they are less and less able to stop or even slow down Russian forces on the battlefield, they will increasingly turn to dirty tricks, right? And this is exactly one example of that. Now, we have been told openly by the Ukrainian sources, right? This was done by the SBU. They're quite open about this. It took them 18 months to plan this, right? So this was long in the works. This is the culmination of 2 years of resources and work. I hope it was worth it, right, for them, because that was, obviously long planned. Obviously, a Russian intelligence failure that they didn't get word of it and stop it. Okay, that's fair. Do I believe that this happened without Western intelligence knowledge and almost certainly backing? I mean, the New York Times told us that the CIA came in and rebuilt the SBU from the Kiev regime's military intelligence from the ground up, and that they are our baby, right? That entire floors of the SBU building. So no, of course, the U.S. intelligence knew about this, almost certainly had their hand in the planning of it. And that's while this fiction of negotiations that the Trump administration did. While this wasn't 18 months, I believe that the timing in which it was enacted is part of a pressure campaign to force Russia to accept the ceasefire that Trump is pushing, that the Kiev regime desperately needs on the battlefield, right? That's the whole purpose, to buy them time, to shove more arms and weapons, to allow them to forcibly conscript more people off the street like dogs, right? That's the whole purpose. Just like last week's big drone swarm attacks that were by and large unsuccessful, right? They targeted Moscow. They targeted, a number of cities around Russia. They fired hundreds of drones each day, or actually most of them were during the day. They weren't even at night. And yes, Russia reciprocated with their own drone and missile strikes that were by and large much more effective because, well, the Kiev regime has no air defense worthy of the name left, and Russia has a very solid, interconnected, integrated, complex, multi-layered air defense and electronic warfare system. And simply the Russian drones as well carry larger payloads. They're now, even the Garans are jet powered and use some machine learning for targeting and guidance, so that they're far more formidable than, shall we say, the drones assembled from Chinese parts that the Kiev regime is using. So that's the purpose, right? I believe that ultimately the timing on which it was unleashed is about pressure for Russia to accept the ceasefire. Of course, it's not going to work. It's not, in fact, if anything, it would have, I would think, the opposite effect. It's not going to achieve that result. The other, of course, is narrative, right? To drive the headlines. We're still in the fight. We're striking back. We're achieving dramatic results. And to be fair, I mean, there is some drama involved in it, right? I mean, this sounds like the plot of a James Bond villain, right? Cargo container trucks full of drones that fly out on command and attack Russian airfields. It sounds like some type of movie plot. Give them that much credit for accomplishing it and originality. Then that becomes the question of the damage assessment, right? So first, let's talk the bridges. Okay, so first off, I'll say the bridges that were destroyed were in Kursk and Bryansk region, although there has also been word that I haven't been able to confirm yet about also a bridge attack in Melitopol, but we'll leave that. We'll concentrate on Kursk and Bryansk. Okay, so attacks on bridges are not an act of terrorism. Bridges are legitimate military targets. These bridges were at least, they had multiple duties. They were used for civilian and economic purposes. They were also used for military purposes. And in that respect, they were, if Russia wants to call them blanket terrorist attacks, that is on them. As a military analyst, I don't consider that. Russia and the Kiev regime have both blown up lots of bridges in this conflict. However, it appears that at least one of those bridges was blown up right as a civilian passenger train was coming forward over the bridge. Now, that's a different story. That is something that warrants investigation about, the knowledge and the timing of such a thing. Of course,
waiting for it.
Yeah, waiting for it. I believe it probably almost certainly was intentional. Of course, trying to prove that in the middle of a conflict is something that can't and won't be done. That certainly elevates that to another level. That does, right? That is a very different story. But so that might be legitimate to call that particular strike a terrorist attack, right? If it was done, as it almost certainly was, with the intention of deliberately killing civilians on a civil passenger plane, if the timing was scheduled for that. But it is the middle of a conflict, and that's what are you going to do? That we're never. Almost certainly never going to know, and if it is, it's going to be lost in war, and that's what happens. But again, dirty tricks in that regard. And it must be said that Russia is making advances in the north, right? They are assembling troops, right? They are pushing down. Putin has ordered the creation of this buffer zone to prevent further incursions on the ground into Kursk and Bryansk and Belgorod, right, all across the northern Russian-Ukrainian border there, but also to prevent long-range drone strikes that are at within the range limit of hitting Moscow. Right, that's also part of the idea of the buffer zone, is to push drone and potentially missile attacks back further. Right, out of range of that. So there's reasons on the ground and reasons in the air for the creation of the buffer zone. And if Russia is creating that buffer zone, of course, the Kiev regime is going to try and slow down the logistics of the troops involved in that. So that was the first part of the day, and then we received word about these drone attacks. Now, there have been before this. Multiple small drone attacks at air bases in Murmansk before, right? In other places in Russia that the Kiev regime should not have been able to get with drones. And previously there has been the question, were they operated out of adjacent NATO territories? Finland, yes. The Baltics, right? Other drone attacks in the south, in the areas of Ryazan and Kazan, where they launched out of Kazakhstan. There was an open question there. And then another suggestion has been that drones were being fired from within Russia, that there was essentially,
Fifth column.
DRG teams, right? Intelligence teams on the ground with trucks, and they were hiding the drones. And there was just last week a case where one of these trucks was caught. Just last week. Whether that truck would have been involved in this attack or not, I guess we'll find out in the coming days. I think it's possible. Yeah. We know that multiple other trucks were planned to be involved in this attack and were stopped, at least in one place by civilians.
Really?
By a civilian person who thought the truck was suspicious. In a couple, in one, at least one, I believe, possibly two other locations. When the drones, when the hidden roof of the truck popped off, and the first drones, and these are for the most part little FPV drones, right? They're not huge. These are not combat drones. This is all very jury rigged. Again, kudos for being innovative.
It's imaginative. Yeah, give them credit. Yeah.
Civilians in the area stopped some of these attacks. They were throwing rocks into the trucks to prevent more of the drones from taking off. So, the damage actually could have been higher without the heroic action of Russian civilians in the area, seeing what was going on and trying to do whatever they could to stop them. And this was dangerous because they then let off self-destruct devices in at least one of those trucks whose drones was prevented from going off, which caused an explosion. So we'll probably get some more details of this. They're coming out, even as we're speaking, we're getting some details. But we do know that there were attacks on at least 5 Russian air bases. One in the far north in Murmansk, Ivanovo and Ryazan regions in central Russia, and the Irkutsk region in Siberia, and a base in the Amur region in the far east, right? So, certainly not within any type of regular range, very, very widespread. And what they were specifically after is Russia's strategic bombers, right?
Yes.
In particular, the 295s and the 222Ms. And also there was a fairly rare and valuable A-50 early warning and control plane, of an AWACS type, right? Not exactly equivalent, but similar idea that was possibly hit as well. Now, the Kiev regime is making claims that some 40 aircraft were damaged or destroyed, right? Not impossible, but I would say unlikely that it's that high. I have seen video evidence of 4, particularly 295s, being hit. Now, it also must be said that not all of those hit were necessarily destroyed. For an aircraft as big as a 295, some small FPV drones, I saw wings catch on fire in 2 occasions. I would venture that up to 5 295s were probably damaged or destroyed with, we don't know exactly. I would say maybe 1 or 2 destroyed, the rest damaged, but repairable. It's important because Russia no longer makes the 295s, right? They're in the process of developing the next gen of a strategic bomber to replace that. So, it is a blow. And it is also must be said that this is another attack on what doubles, right? These bombers can be used for purposes. They are used to launch conventional missiles, but they have been in this conflict. So they're certainly legitimate targets. But they can also be used to launch nuclear weapons, right? They're part of Russia's nuclear triad. So that at a strategic level is a I don't want to say unprecedented attack, because we have seen attacks on Russia's strategic capabilities before in this conflict. And it is, no matter what, no matter how much damage was done or not, and I assume it's not as much as the Kiev regime claims, and it's not as little as some on the Russian, side hope, somewhere almost certainly in the middle, it's still bad, right? It is still an accomplishment for the Kiev regime, and a failure for Russian intelligence. And it once again is going to bring up, we've seen attacks on far spread Russian airfields before in this conflict. And the question once again is, why are there aircraft being parked anywhere not in fortified structures, fortified hangars, underground, above ground, whatever? I know it's a tall order, but when you're dealing with such valuable aircraft, right, the resources should have been, no matter where, because obviously the Kiev regime can reach anywhere in Russia. I know it's hard. There's an incredibly large border. Millions of former Ukrainian citizens are now citizens of Russia. And undoubtedly, there is some penetration of the Kiev regime's intelligence within that. Even before the conflict started, even before 2022, there were millions of Ukrainians who live and work in Russia and have and continue to do so. It's not something that can easily be, filtered out. There's always going to be problems with it. You say, how do you stop it? Ultimately, you get rid of the Kiev regime, right? And even after that, it'll probably still continue in some guerrilla style for a time after that. You can tighten things. You can and should build fortified enclosures, even for the biggest, but the most expensive of aircraft, wherever they are hangared in Russia. And so, some people in the military will and should answer questions about that. Ultimately, is it going to change the course of this conflict? No. The damage was not, they spent a long time preparing for this, and it was at least partially successful. Not as successful as they wanted, but they obviously, there were some things stopped quite evidently at 2 of the air bases. All of the drones were stopped by existing Russian defenses for those bases, air defense, electronic warfare. Not one got through. But for a final tally, we'll have to wait for a couple days, and it will come out on the Russian Telegram channels. I'm quite sure there's enough of them that are cognizant and will be critical of the mistakes that were obviously made by the Russian military that may have contributed to allow this to be at least partially successful. But the question is now, to me and to a lot of people out there, obviously the West, certainly the CIA knew about this, however they had their fingers in it, whether we'll find out or not, we don't know, but it puts a whole lie to the actual intent of the so-called, peace negotiations being pushed by the Trump administration, right? As if they're third party.
And just to interrupt real quick, Axios initially came out and said that Trump was told. And then after the fact, CBS was like, oh, Trump didn't know anything about it. And so they pulled that part of it. And I'm like, dude, it took 18 months. And you're trying to tell me that, meaning
they brag that they own the Ukrainian intelligence, that they rebuilt it from the ground up, that it's their baby. But we didn't know that. Yeah, okay, whatever. Right.
It's like Trump is always apparently either unaware, untold, doesn't read, or doesn't know about what Ukraine is doing, but knows everything about what Russia is doing. And then this is like, oh man, I didn't know anything about it. And just to go after Russian media for a bit, they are doing everything in their power in the most annoying way possible to separate what Zelensky is doing with Trump, which is aggravating to me. And even when I see some of these people on social media who is like, Trump should pick up the phone and call Putin, which set me off yesterday. And I'm like, why? They're acting as if Trump is a mediator. Like they've drunk this Kool-Aid in believing that Trump is a mediator and he's just out to lunch. and Zelensky in Ukraine has gone rogue. They've missed the plot. He is belligerent.
There are increasingly a lot of Russian voices that are really angry and disgusted with the Kremlin even going through the pantomime of these peace negotiations. And there are diplomatic reasons why I consider, why the Kremlin, might want to continue going through this, even if they stand firm, which I believe they will, and nothing comes out of it at the end. This is a war of diplomatic and PR maneuver that is happening with these negotiations. But it has to be said, there's a lot of people within Russia that are just like very annoyed and very frustrated with even the pantomime, even going through the motions of this, particularly after this, it was to a significant degree at least a partial success and a failure for Russia that it was gotten through, and it will create again, it will continue to foster the image that Russia's not winning this war, right?
I am deeply
we hear that reiterated by so many people still. And
yes.
Kiev regime is still in the fight. Oh, they are, but increasingly, I mean, on the battlefield, last week in 7 days, Russia took 18 settlements in the Sumy region, right? That is it speaks, when you are aware of the progress of how much faster Russian forces are moving and how badly stretched out and how incapable and undersupplied the Kiev regime forces are in the battlefield. That's why it becomes ever more important in this narrative and politics driven regime, that the West in that regard is fully involved in maintaining that. I've seen multiple comments, right, that like with the Kursk incursion, the Kiev regime score important narrative victories. Well, if only narrative victories won a war. Well, they're not going to win this war. I mean, there was, who was the official? Was it Pearl Wolfowitz? Something from the first Bush administration that said,
Paul Wolfowitz.
Yeah, we create our own reality, right? Speaking of the narrative, that is where both the Zelensky proxy regime and the West are at this moment. They are maintaining a fictional narrative and hoping that simply repeating it and insisting on it will make it real. I don't believe it will. Maybe there's some countries that whose domestic political structure, their society, would break under that kind of pressure. But Russia is too well insulated by the media, the Cyrillic language, a whole number of things that the Russian population is not as susceptible to that type of narrative manipulation and management. What
do you say to people who say Putin is being manipulated and managed? And by the way, I'm one of those people. I'm not going to take this. Sometimes the media say, what do you say about people? I'm one of those people. I know that the belief is that, well, if we pretend that we go through this pantomime of negotiations, that we may be able to get something out of it. And look, I agree. Right. So I'm not against them going through the motions of negotiations. By the same token, though, those people who are screaming Trump should pick up the phone and call Putin, part of my issue and my anger with that is, dude, Trump is a belligerent in this conflict. And for all of this pretending that they're in talks, Putin is moderating what is taking place on the battlefield to try to get better headlines, or at the very least to try to manipulate Trump. And by definition, on some level, that's a manipulation of Putin himself. Donald Trump is a belligerent. So trying to get him on your side seems like a fool's errand when he's a belligerent and party to the conflict. I like, what do you say to people who say, well, Putin is not manipulating Trump, it's the other way around. Putin is limiting and restraining himself under this model of trying to get, Trump on this side. And by the way, you can see it for RT. Like just the language that they use, the acting as if Trump is being managed, or Trump is not being given the information, Trump is not being given the data. even Russian officials have said this nonsense, as if there's some daylight, there's some separation between what is happening on the battlefield in regards to what Ukraine is doing versus Trump's knowledge of those events. Give me a take on that.
Yeah, so first of all, RT is not like some Chinese English language newspapers, right? What comes out of RT, it would shock people to discover how little it is from the Russian government. Right?
Fair enough.
I mean, obviously there are links, there are interests, but having been, while not an RT employee, about as close as it's possible to be for many years without, I mean, there's
separation, and I know
very little to none.
Yeah.
Often it would be like, well, how do we run this story? If only we had some word from on high about how we should, but there isn't, right?
Fair enough.
That's really a problem. So there obviously is a commonality of interest, but there's remarkably little to none. Direct messaging from the Russian government in that regard. So when you say some people are manipulating, some people believe some people are manipulating Putin, who are those people that are manipulating Putin?
What I mean by that is the very act of trying to negotiate with Donald Trump and trying to seem amenable and reasonable and trying to say, okay, we'll have this 30-day or this ceasefire against energy grids. Okay, well, basically he is limiting, or it comes across as if he's limiting the activity and restraining, let's say, the Russian military and himself and their objectives under this model of trying to get Donald Trump to believe that he is more amenable as opposed to Zelensky. I mean, you've made this argument that part of the reason that he's doing that and they're going through this pantomime of peace negotiations because all things being equal, they want Trump to believe that Ukraine is the one that is not interested in negotiations. I guess I'm saying, isn't that a fool's errand? Donald Trump is A, the main actor that is keeping this conflict going, and B, is part of the country that was the instigator to the conflict in the first place.
So all sides of it, I mean, whether we're talking the Kremlin, Putin, and other Russian officials, whether we're talking the White House, whether we're talking the European political elites, the EU technocracy, the individual state leaders, whether we're talking Zelensky and the Kiev regime, everyone is trying to manipulate each other. I mean, there's no question about that. That's the constant game. I would venture to say that if Trump is trying to manipulate, and people in the U.S. are trying to manipulate Putin in the Kremlin, and Putin and the Kremlin are trying to manipulate Trump and his people around him, I would venture to say that I'm a lot more confident in Putin's ability to manipulate Trump than the other way around, without saying that it's not a part of the game, right? Both sides trying to manipulate each other. But I would venture to think that Putin is pretty intelligent, extremely to the point of insanity, well informed, and very capable and strong-willed in his motivations and intentions.
Let me ask you this way, then. Is Putin limiting?
I don't think Trump is any of those things, by the way.
No, he's not. He's incompetent. He's deeply incompetent. But is Putin limiting his activities with the idea of to give this idea that he is trying to negotiate?
So what do you think Russia would do that they're not doing now because they are simultaneously involved in this dance? Is there something that Russia would be doing? Is there some connection? Because I'm not so sure that there's something that Russia would be doing on the battlefield, separate, that they would not be doing, or they should be doing if they weren't involved in these negotiations. I'm not so sure that's necessarily true. You could argue that the Russian government should be pounding all of Ukraine with Oreshniks and killing the Ukrainian leadership, but I think they have a pretty strong battle plan, and I don't necessarily think that that is the reason why Russia limits itself. I think there are limits of a calculated game, either correctly or incorrectly, on deterring Russia, NATO from intervening directly in the conflict openly, right? Becoming an open NATO-Russia war, which I think the Kremlin does seek to avoid. And as always, the Russian government is despite all the propaganda in the Western mainstream media to the contrary, far more concerned about limiting Russian military casualties than the Kiev regime or the West is interested in limiting casualties among the Kiev regime's forces and forced conscripts and the like. I mean, what was that phrase that was it Mark Milley? It was the Pentagon used to criticize the Kiev regime during the NATO planned and failed summer 2023 offensive in the South, too casualty averse. I mean, that was the word out of the U.S. military, right? You're not too willing to get enough of your people killed to achieve the objectives we think you should be able to achieve, right? So I think the exact opposite is true, right? I mean, Russia wants to win this, and they are willing to put their people at risk, but not unnecessary risk, not when things might be done a little bit slower, but with much greater loss of life and much, at least the calculation, less risk of overt escalation to World War III. At the same time, part of this diplomatic dance is not directed against Trump or the West at all. Some of it is directed against Russian allies in BRICS, and in the global China. South, if you will, to show that yes, we are and always have been the reasonable people, and we are willing to pursue, at least the option of achieving our goals diplomatically, even if the chances of it are not very high. They're maintaining, shall we say, the diplomatic high ground. But I'm not so sure that necessarily means they're sacrificing things on the battlefield because of some type of restraint because of that. I'm not so, maybe, right? But I haven't seen any direct evidence of that, right? That
will there
Russia
be retaliation?
Would be doing something else. Will there be retaliation? Sure. It will be calculated. Will it be retaliation that Russia wouldn't have necessarily made anyway and will simply be called retaliation? I don't know. We'll have to see what the extent of that is. Obviously, the number one target to me should be the Kiev regime's intelligence because they at least carried it out. I would also hope that in the scope of going after the Kiev regime's intelligence, they try to go after all of the Western intelligence that are actually on the ground, at least, helping them out or, green lighting at the very least.
See, that's right there, Mark. That's my point. If they got the ability to do that and they had the ability to do that, why weren't they doing it already? That's what I mean by restraint.
Okay. So Russia has gone after the Kiev regime's intelligence, particularly their military intelligence, but also SBU installations multiple times before, right? Russia has not gone after political, right? They have not tried to assassinate, no matter the propaganda claims to the contrary, right? There haven't been any assassination attempts from the Russian government on Zelensky or others, where they, routinely go after political assassination of political leaders, military leaders, thousands of political leaders, activists, everyone across the former Ukrainian states, right? Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, Zaporozhye, and Crimea. That's a regular feature. Russia doesn't go after the political leaders because it doesn't believe that achieves anything. in fact, they believe that most of the Kiev regime's officials and leaders, like Zelensky, that they're so bad at what they, so incompetent, so bad at what they do, that replacing them would only increase the chance that someone more competent would have the position, right? But the competent people planning this out, such as they are competent, and there's question, right? The whole British planned cross the Dnieper Krinky crusade to take Crimea, that was not competence, right? That was just complete, utter military fantasy and failure. Likewise, the Mark Milley planned southern offensive, right, into Zaporozhye. That was not competence. But occasionally they get off successes, and I certainly believe they had their finger in this thing. But again, this is not something that's going to change any type of strategic realities. Or realities on the course of the battlefield. It hurts. It's a black eye, if you want, or something. But ultimately, it's more about narrative than it is about military success.
Let me ask you something. So, from my point of view, you're far too rational, right? Like the way that I feel about it.
I flip. Some days I get emotional, right? Sometimes I don't. Today might be one of my I'm bipolar, right? Today is more my rational.
I feel far more brutal about this.
Yeah.
And I guess my thing is, if Russia actually wants negotiations and they actually want a deal, then savage prosecution of the war seems to be the better way to get it. Donald Trump has been.
I think they are doing. I mean, you could argue that it should be more savage, but I think they are going about that. Again, I don't necessarily believe that having Medinsky sit in Istanbul is necessarily a restraint or limitation on what the Russian military is doing on the battlefield. And just blowing stuff up with Oreshniks in Ukraine may not necessarily be the best response or general strategy going before. Yeah, the Kremlin and the Stavka, the Russian military leaders, they're pretty cold-blooded. They're pretty rational, right?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, they're probably more cold-blooded and rational than I am. And in general, that's a good thing. Even if a gut emotional response at any given moment, makes me, curse things like this that happened, right? I do believe that, generally speaking, they know better. They've certainly made some mistakes, right? And again, there was a mistake. There was an intelligence failure, right? I will not contest that, in the slightest. But that doesn't mean that the correct response is to go all half-cocked and to blow stuff up with Oreshniks to satisfy, some type of emotional demand for, revenge, for retribution. I think the retribution should be cold-blooded and calculated.
No, I understand. In fact, I told the audience that's what you were going to say.
I'm sorry. Again, like this is a rational day for me.
And that's a negative. They have a strategy and they're enacting their strategy. I do get it. And it's like this doesn't change anything. Yeah.
Russia is beating all of NATO on the battlefield, and all the attempts to obfuscate that and claim otherwise. They've survived an existential economic war that would crush all but probably one other country in the world, right? If it was leveled at them, maybe one or two, right? They have endured the entire military might that could be employed by not just NATO, not just the collective West, but anyone else they could rope into sending resources.
Serbia,
Pakistan,
Korea.
Israel, Serbia, sending last. They've done all of that, and Russia is still. The comparison that came out of the Pentagon about a month ago, someone compared to the Russian advances as like a slow-moving lava flow, right? That you can move back out of the way, but the advance of that lava flow is inexorable,
Yeah.
right? There's nothing you're going to do to stop it, and that's like the Russian advances here. Could be faster, right? There would be a cost for that, a cost diplomatically, a cost militarily, a cost potentially to political stability within Russia, and they have all these things calculated. And without saying that they can't make mistakes, they have made mistakes. I'll be willing to give them a fair shake here and see what they do in response and see. Again, we can talk intelligence failure. We can talk about that every airbase should have hardened facilities for all of their aircraft wherever they are in Russia. Those are two things that I wouldn't argue with at all, and those are legitimate criticisms. But just don't fall victim to that emotional need for some type of big bang. That's such it is such a male thing. Admittedly, I am part of that gender, that sex, I should say, myself, right? And so I certainly understand the impulse, right? Someone strikes me, I want to strike them back. And I don't want to take an eye for an eye. I want to take two eyes for one.
Right.
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 But the Kremlin is remarkably cold-blooded and calculated, and they are restrained, I believe, primarily in the interest of long-range strategic calculations and avoiding World War III more than anything else. Again, it's not a guarantee that they get things right, but I trust them more than I trust my gut response.
What do you say about this notion that the longer the war goes, the more attempts that NATO has to attack Russia? Because
it's undoubtedly
absolutely true. You say absolutely true?
Absolutely true. Yeah. Of course, they will read anything as Russia's weakness, right? Anytime Russia shows restraint or waits and does something, the West only understands strength, and what's more, they only understand obvious and crude demonstrations of strength, right? And doubtless this will encourage them to do more such dirty tricks. The only thing I can say is it took them a year and a half to plan and execute this, right? They can plan a few more of these things and give Russia a few more pokes and stings along the way. And at the end of the day, Russia is still going to remove that regime in Kiev at the end.
One last thing before I let you go. So there are reports that Russia is preparing for an overwhelming offensive. And apparently there is a massive military buildup at certain locations. Where's the airbase? One airbase in particular, I had this thing right here. So it says, I think it's called LL-76 transport plane has arrived at the Russian Ingles 2 airbase. It's already the 8th flight in 4 days. Such activity was recorded for the first time in the last 3 years. So Ukraine is basically reporting that Russia is in a buildup phase, especially from the standpoint of their armaments at some of these air bases. Yeah. Do you think that is part to why the attack took place on the air bases in this way? I mean, obviously, if they took this along the planet, they were already going after it. And the thing that I was getting at with the NATO part was because going after Russia's strategic planes like that was a specific NATO target. Even bombing the railroads was, again, that was something that NATO talked about, saying, hey, we can blow up the Russian railways, and this would slow down their ability, and we can use IEDs to do it. That's exactly what they did. They were going after Russia's ability to strike back in regards to some kind of nuclear assault, meaning if the US, well, let's say NATO versus Russia, and it ends up being a nuclear conflict, they wanted to damage Russia's ability to respond in kind. I mean, these were NATO attacks. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. Like, the longer the war goes on, the more they get the opportunity to strike from the shadows where Russia can't create a justification to actually go after them. But I'm sorry.
No. I agree with that, right? I believe there are both, there are, rationales, that were probably both considered. Yes, this is deteriorating Russia's nuclear strategic assets. It's also deteriorating their strategic conventional assets, right? Carriers to launch cruise missiles, for the conflict in Ukraine. And I very much believe that movement into angles is about, Russia almost preparing for more and larger missile strikes, right? That's almost, so yes. But that almost certainly factors into the Kiev regime's, desire to limit this. But again, at the end of the day, despite events like this, right, that NATO undoubtedly had their hands in, the U.S. Supreme Commander Cavioli, General Cavioli of NATO armed forces in Europe, has himself testified multiple times that at the end of the day, the Russian military is far larger, more capable, more experienced, more skilled, more evolved equipment, more just absolutely pumping military industrial complex. Mm-hmm. If the goal of this is to weaken Russia, it's not working. You're only making the bear stronger and angrier. At the end of the day, we can endure these stings. We can even endure a few black eyes and bloody pointed stick wounds, right? But at the end of the day,
it doesn't change anything on the ground.
I don't think, again, that word inexorable again and again and again. And it's not absolutely inexorable. The Kremlin is balancing a lot of things. They're balancing domestic political support that is essential. It's essential for 40 to 50 or 60,000 guys signing up, volunteer, motivated soldiers to participate in this. It's essential for the domestic political support that across society for the SMO that drives this. They're balancing the economy, right, to make sure, once again, that the political side inside Russia, the domestic, doesn't become disenchanted because of domestic political things. They also want to maintain a strong domestic economy and ramp up the military industrial. They're balancing so many different things in this, and to try for us to armchair focus on any particular one at any particular time. I mean, I guess you could argue that as media figures and analysts, that's what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
But I am perfectly willing, when I believe it is necessary, to criticize the Russian government. And I've done so on many, many, many occasions. But I also believe in being cool-headed and restrained in that criticism till I get enough of the facts that I believe are warranted. And I said there are certain things we can consider here.
Yeah, that's fair.
But ultimately, I think there is a reason why the Russian government is going through this diplomatic pantomime. And I find it annoying, at some level, like, oh my God, is this nonsense still going on? Okay, let's check and see what happened on the battlefield, right? That's where I am. But I'm
speaking of that.
I don't think
memorandum
that it is necessarily bad. Yes.
No, I agree with you. I don't think going through they should go through the diplomacy. I'm not against it at all. I guess my thing was brutality more so. But the memorandum, I don't know another way to say it, right? The memorandum itself.
More bombs, bigger bombs.
Right. So Ukraine brings their dead letter path to peace, which is complete nonsense.
Yeah. Their demands for an unconditional ceasefire, right?
Yeah, which again is complete nonsense. Did Russia ever out theirs?
I'm sorry?
Did Russia ever out there? I don't remember Russia ever.
No, not yet. No, they haven't yet,
Okay.
and they refused to. They said we're not going to release it beforehand. We're not going to allow the West time to prepare a response for the Kiev regime for this. We're not going to allow media to manipulate it beforehand. We'll present it at the actual meeting with the Ukrainians on the other side of the table, and that is a diplomatic maneuver itself. Yeah. Right, they're all extremely angry and frustrated and everything, and that's part of Russia's diplomatic game that is going on. No, we're not going to tell you what's in it beforehand. This is a high stakes, serious diplomatic negotiation involving a conflict. Right, we'll do it the proper way. We're not going to leak it to the media beforehand. There's something to say about this. And ultimately, what the Kiev regime and its Western backers are doing now with regards to their demands for a ceasefire. I saw a meme posted by the Irish journalist Che Boys,
yes,
that summarized it completely for me. It was the picture, like a pen and ink drawing of two Roman gladiators, one defeated and one standing above him with the sword and looking to the crowd for the thumbs up, thumbs down signal. And the one on the ground, of course, is the Kiev regime in Ukraine, and they're turning to the crowd and saying, "I demand a 30-day ceasefire, unconditionally." Right? I mean, that's where it is.
I mean, these plans are going to be irreconcilable. Russia's already, for the most part, given their plan. They haven't deviated from it for the past several years.
No, they have not. They haven't moved an inch. Not one concession. Not anything. They don't feel they need to. Again, we'll go through. The pantomime. We'll go through the pretense. But ultimately, you don't agree to our terms, then we'll achieve the terms on the battlefield. If you agree to our terms, then this can all end now.
Do you think Trump walks?
No, I don't believe he can. I think there's just too much institutional pressure, too much U.S. national interests. Even considering that on a personal level, I believe that Trump has nothing but contempt for Zelensky. He hates the European political elite. He doesn't personally care that much about Ukraine. But still, he is now the U.S. president. He owns this war. The U.S. interest that he can't separate himself from is the U.S. interest is preserving a U.S. proxy regime in Ukraine as best he can. And I don't believe that he can walk away from it. I mean, I certainly, if I was a hoping man, which I don't do hope, I would say that I hope that he can shrug that off and walk away, but I don't believe it. I any more than I believe that he was going to have an administration not full of neocons.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean,
I think he will gripe and he will scream, and it's not my war, it's Biden, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, he will find himself dragged more and more back into doing what the Biden administration was doing, which is more ineffectual sanctions and scraping the barrel of whatever military supplies they can provide to the Kiev regime to keep it fighting as long as possible, and probably a little time after that, right? And it will drag this out, and it will raise the costs to Russia. But I do believe that he probably won't ever be as full-throated in that support as the Biden administration was. Right? At least for the moment, the U.S. is not literally firing ballistic missiles into mainland Russia. Right? I mean, we were there. We were at a Cuban Missile Crisis, perhaps greater moment. And the only thing that prevented that was the Kremlin's belief that whatever else the Trump administration was going to do, it was going to back off that degree of provocation. And to be fair, up to this point, they have, right? So, I mean, I don't expect or hope or give the Trump administration much credit for anything else. But I will give them credit for we're not literally at World War III right now. The Russian side already showed restraint. the Trump side backed off of what Biden was doing, at least in that regard, up until this moment as well.
I guess the question is, and this could be the last one, at some point, Zelensky is going to run out of money. And they've already started begging people for what, $44 billion for 2026, something like that, some insane amount of money.
The Kiev regime requires somewhere between 40 and 60 billion dollars just of economic support to pay the bills, right? To pay the soldiers, to pay the bureaucrats, to keep what lights it has on. That's not even talking military aid. That's because the Kiev regime really has no effective economy at this point, right? That they require somewhere between 40 and 60 billion just to keep them going. The thing is that, the U.S. can just print money on demand, right?
Well, that's the question. Do you think Trump is going to do that? That's exactly what I was going to ask you. And this could be the last question. Do you think he's going to, because at some point the question is going to come up. Is Congress going to pass an appropriations bill to give Zelensky money? And can he even politically do
that? That's a tough call.
That's a tough one, right? I don't know the answer to that one either.
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, anyone who says they can really predict Trump, I think is wrong, because Trump doesn't. He's constantly changing his mind according to the people around him, right? That are convincing him. The last person we talked to him 15 minutes ago, right? I don't necessarily believe that he has too many strongly held opinions, other than that William McKinley was cool and that was the golden age of America, right? Tariffs good, sanctions bad. I mean, I'm laughing, but we're mocking, but I really, it's hard to pin. That's why Putin at one point said Kamala Harris and Biden were predictable. Trump is not. We prefer a predictable adversary to an unpredictable one by and large.
Mark Sleboda, International Relations Security Analyst. You can follow Mark Sleboda on Mark Sleboda 1 on Twitter. You can also catch him on Boosty. That is going to be, I guess, kind of like a Substack Patreon type account.
Yes,
where you can
the
find
Real Politics on Boosty, and
Real
also on Substack and Telegram.
He's fantastic. He's fantastic. Mark, thank you for this, man. I really appreciate it. You be safe, okay?
You as well.
All right. I want to go from one damn good guest to another damn good guest. We're joined with the man himself, Danny Haiphong. Danny Haiphong is a journalist, geopolitical analyst. You can find him on Twitter at GeopoliticsDH and on YouTube at Geopolitics Haiphong. I want to make sure I got that right. How you doing, Danny? You doing okay, man?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. Great to be here, Jamal.
No, man, it's great to have you. Hegseth is a lunatic. Let's start there. Hegseth is a lunatic. So Hegseth went to Singapore, and he gives a deranged, if we need to fight China, and we will fight and we will win. I mean, it was that level of speech. And just so the audience can get a taste of this, of how outlandish the speech was. For one, let's be very clear. The U.S. is surrounding China militarily, this kind of Hobson choice. You also have the situation where they are military in Taiwan as we speak, something that is way over a red line with China. And so as he's given the speech, just keep in mind, they are doing everything that he's claiming he is not doing in the speech. Let's play right here. All right. This is Hegseth in
conquer Taiwan by force.
There we are. Hegseth
would result in
Singapore.
The United States
I'm just going to play
to work
part of
with
this.
any country that is willing to step up and preserve the global and regional peace that we all hold dear. Your presence here today sends a strong message about our shared purpose, our shared commitment to peace, our shared dedication to a free and open Indo-Pacific. And as our allies share the burden, we can increase our focus on the Indo-Pacific, our priority theater. You see, here in the Indo-Pacific, our futures are bound together. The prosperity and security of the American people are linked to those of your people. We share your vision of peace and stability, of prosperity and security. And we are here to stay. Any attempt by Communist China to conquer Taiwan by force would result in devastating consequences for the Indo-Pacific and the world. There's no reason to sugarcoat it. The threat China poses is real, and it could be imminent. We hope not, but it certainly could be.
Part in the speech, he even goes so far as to say, if the commander-in-chief asks me or asks the Department of Defense to militarily fight a war over Taiwan, we will do it and we will win. That speech is outlandish. I mean, like, he talks about, we're not here to be conquerors. We're not here to conquer China. We're not here to surround China. And as I point out, he's doing all of that. Like, this is astonishing. And one last part before I let you in. He says, we need Europe to step up to deal with Russia so we can transfer our assets over to the Pacific. Give me a take on this, just to step into it.
Well, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, he often talks about, as he did in Shangri-La, that the United States is interested in deterrence. And there is a media clip also that has gone around earlier in the Trump administration where he is literally saying that in order to obtain peace, one must prepare for war. So Pete Hegseth has outright claimed that the United States is indeed preparing for war, but on the premise that China is about to invade Taiwan. And we have to understand that China is preparing for war. China's military is growing at an astounding rate, and it is investing not as much as the United States in terms of dollar amount in its military, but it is building up a heavily fortified and highly modern military to defend itself from what the United States is actually doing. And just a few key points on what the United States is actually doing, which is provoking China to solidify and increase its defense expenditures and build this modern military. It was just reported not a month ago that the United States has almost 10 times the number of U.S. military personnel on Taiwan itself, 500 about training the so-called Taiwan military for what? Well, they're training for a war with China. Not only this, but the Bilikatan military exercises that the United States has been conducting with the Philippines explicitly named Taiwan as the reason for their existence. And during these exercises, the United States placed anti-ship missiles on islands surrounding the Philippines. So
Haiphong.
the United States is preparing for war with China, but it is an incredibly, just an absolutely astoundingly suicidal mission. The CSIS, the Center for Strategic International Studies, has wargamed the United States' ability to fight a war over Taiwan with China, and the results are absolutely just damning. So one of the key issues I know you've been covering, Jamal, is the United States' military industrial capacity is actually quite weak. And we've seen this with Ukraine. People might remember that during the Biden administration, when he green-lighted ATACMS missiles to be launched, against Russia on Russian territory by Ukraine, what ended up happening in just a couple of months is that Ukraine used up about its 40 or so ATACMS missiles that it was given, and that was it. There are no more ATACMS. It's not the Trump administration cutting off ATACMS missiles necessarily from Ukraine right now. It's a deliberate policy, but actually there just are no more ATACMS missiles to give. And this is actually a big problem across the board for the United States' military. And it's been reported by CSIS in these war games that if you take, for example, the long-range anti-ship missiles that have just been stationed in and around the Philippines, targeting and pointing to Taiwan, the United States only has budgeted about 88 of those in its entire military arsenal, and that the CSIS has already said that if the United States engages with a war over Taiwan against China, all of these missiles are going to be gone in a matter of 2 weeks. And it takes 2 years to produce one of these under the U.S.'s current military production system. And I know you've covered this. Also, Jamal, the reason why this is because the United States has a for-profit military industrial complex, which is really just seeking to gobble up all of the contracts it can and produce the least that it can to sustain this overstretched and honestly outpaced empire. And the Wall Street Journal now has also come out and talked about how the United States' military industrial base has withered while China's is booming. And I just want to give one statistic here. China has built more than twice as many naval vessels as the United States since the year 2000. Now the number of naval ships is just incomparable between the US and China. So this is actually a suicidal mission. And one of the key points here to really hit home about when Pete Hegseth talks like this, they don't actually care about this reality. They don't care about winning a war. They don't care about what the results would be. CSIS says that basically everyone will lose. The entire world economy will be destroyed. The U.S. military will be completely battered and damaged. Taiwan will be utterly destroyed. But guess what? That's what the United States is already doing to Taiwan already by basically placing it into debt peonage through military arms sales with $21.5 billion worth of a backlog, which will never get settled because of the U.S.'s military production issues and because Taiwan will never be able to pay this. But Taiwan is going through its own economic problems. There are shortages in eggs. There's high inflation. And the Trump administration is trying to, through this chips war, actually offshore the one thing that Taiwan does really well, which is build advanced semiconductors. He's trying to offshore that back to the United States. So all of this is to say is that when Pete Hegseth talks like this, it is the United States preparing for a suicidal war, which is really all about containing China, weakening China, and hopefully in their fantasies, overthrow the government of China and the economy of China so that the United States has free reign over the world with absolutely no challenges and alternatives. It's not working and it's not going to work, but the Trump administration, I believe, through this speech and what we have seen over the course of this administration is it's really trying to pivot in this direction as hard as it can while maintaining the theaters of war in West Asia and Ukraine to the satisfaction, of course, of the warmongers who prefer those. So it's a really delicate situation. I think it's actually a really bad situation. And Pete Hegseth seems to be very good at exposing not only the suicidal mission, but also the absolute impotence of the United States' empire itself.
Yeah, effectively, it's the opposite of everything Pete Hegseth said. We're not trying to overthrow the Chinese government. Yes, you are. We're not trying to surround China. Yes, you are. Like, we're not trying to provoke China. Yes, you are. Like, all of these things, right, are the opposite. Taiwan has to see Ukraine. And I know Taiwan is different because, under the one China policy, Taiwan is China. So it's an internal matter, which, again, even makes it that much more astonishing from the Chinese perspective, right? We're not trying to rip away Hawaii from the United States. Why are you dealing with an internal matter? But the notion that the U.S. is acting as if we're willing to fight a war over Taiwan. Taiwan has to see what's happening with Ukraine right now. What is going on with their government? Is their government really that suicidal?
Well, as it is currently constituted, yes, underlining to the DPP administration of the so-called governing authority is in fact extremely radical in terms of its separatism. This has been a big issue for China, the mainland, the People's Republic of China, in dealing with Taiwan, that there is absolutely very little room under the DPP to actually come to any kind of rational understanding and cooperation about how to settle this dispute, which it is a real dispute. People have to remember that it's actually not separatism that is at question here, despite what the DPP and Lai Ching-te and these kind of forces claim. The original dispute over Taiwan is actually about what is the rightful government of Taiwan and the Republic of China government under Chiang Kai-shek. I was just in Chongqing and visited the last prison that was martyring and just absolutely torturing the victorious communists, and they were taken out just a month later. In Chongqing, that was their last stronghold. Chiang Kai-shek had to flee to Formosa, as it was called back then, but now Taiwan, because they lost. And the argument is that the Republic of China government, this nationalist government, is indeed the government of all of China. But separatism is the poison pill that has been stoked and fostered, of course, with U.S. support and aid, and of course, military support, just direct military support, which is essentially using this party as a proxy, similar to Ukraine, but even more dangerous in the sense that there's absolutely no way any kind of Taiwan military can be built up. It's a complete fantasy. The CSIS says the so-called navy that Taiwan has would be wiped out in a matter of 96 hours. So forget any kind of protracted Ukraine conflict when it comes to a conflict over Taiwan. This is really all about the United States trying to be the puppet master on this island that is a legitimate part of China. And it's not going to go well. The KMT, the old nationalists, actually, the party of Chiang Kai-shek, they are actually in favor of one China and settling this dispute in a way that can work for the respective parties, which more so would look like what it is now. Actually, in reality, it's a one country, two systems model similar to Hong Kong with its own intricacies. But the DPP has absolutely no interest in doing this, which makes it so, just absolutely so beholden to U.S. interests. And it really is a losing and suicidal mission that will eventually, if all things go as they are now, lead to just a total disaster for the island of Taiwan, should the U.S. get its way.
This is terrifying to me because this is, from my point of view, the U.S. has a tendency to poke and salami slice. And I know China likes to do these win-win relationships. I know they want to make agreements around the world, agreements in the region. The last thing they want to do is fight a war. But the U.S., in the same way that they don't care about Ukrainians, where they would feed Ukrainians to the wood chipper of the Russian military, they would do the exact same thing with Taiwan. They try to bog China down into a war or score some kind of propaganda victory of, oh my God, look at what China did. They've attacked Taiwan. We said the attack was imminent, and look at what's taking place. And of course, Europe is going to fall in line with this. I don't know if the rest of the world is going to fall in line with this, but it's an open wound. It's a sore. It's one of those pressure points that they know that they can get a reaction out of China if they just keep poking and poking. Sending military into Taiwan is an astonishing radical escalation. Putting those Typhoon missiles in the Philippines, again, a radical escalation. All of these things are escalations. How far do you think they're going to push with this? And do you really think they're going to push to the point of an actual war? At some point, China will have to respond.
Well, the United States will. I am very convinced that the United States will push for this. And it's because the United States cannot tolerate China's system. They can't. The United States is ruling elite. They view China's planned economy, its market socialist economy, whatever people want to call it. China has a variety of names, socialism with Chinese characteristics. Yeah. Regardless of the name, this is a system that the United States' ruling elite desperately wants to see out of the picture. And so the United States, its leadership, not the people of the United States, but the government, the presidential administrations, the Pentagon, the intelligence agencies are foaming at the mouth now. They're making entire absolutely ridiculous videos trying to, the CIA is recruit Chinese officials in an absolutely hilarious way. But so the United States' political system, its power structure, its imperial albatross, that wants to push. China, though, and I think this is where the good news is that China has been playing this very well. People often talk about how Russia has been maneuvering the special military operation in Ukraine. Well, China has been maneuvering cross-straits relations since the advent of New China, 1949. We have to remember that there were two Taiwan Straits crises during the beginning period of the New China, the Chinese Revolution of October 1949. And both of these crises were very much a theater of war, where the U.S. actually threatened to drop nuclear bombs onto China. And we have to remember, during this time, during the first Taiwan Straits crisis, China was also aiding Korea in its liberation war against the United States. So all of this to say is that China has been maneuvering this for a very long time. China is very firm in its position, but China also has a very principled policy that is widespread in terms of its support from the Chinese people, which is there's no moving on Taiwan being part of China, and that everything will be done first to ensure that there's peaceful reunification and a peaceful resolution of any disputes that exist between authorities on Taiwan and the People's Republic of China government, up until, of course, the United States interferes and stokes separatism. It is there where everything is off the table and it will be war. So China has shown this on numerous occasions, which is why the Indo-Pacific Command is panicking so much. It's why Pete Hegseth is talking like this. The United States' military brass is actually very concerned about what China was able to demonstrate in multiple military drills that have occurred since the United States began sending U.S. officials, most famously Nancy Pelosi in August of 2023. Those military drills sent a strong and stark message to the United States' military brass that in a matter of minutes, China could basically form a chokehold around the island, and it would essentially be, especially on the economic realm, game over for everything that the United States is trying to do. So that is frightening the United States' military brass. They don't really know what to do about this. The hope is that if the United States can, and you mentioned it earlier, there's a huge noose militarily around Taiwan, and the late John Pilger talked about this in The Coming War on China in his documentary all the way back in 2016. If the United States can organize, and you heard Pete Hegseth say it, if all of these allies can do what Pete Hegseth wants Europe to do for Ukraine, if all of the countries in Asia surrounding China can bankrupt themselves and invest to fortify their militaries with U.S. weapons, U.S. Logistics support, and whatever else is needed to fight a war with China, then that will give the U.S. the advantage it needs. It will give the United States the ability to, once a war actually does happen, it won't have to bear the brunt of the cost. Unfortunately, this is, of course, or fortunately enough, we should say, this is child's play. It's a ridiculous notion. ASEAN countries, Southeast Asia, the Asia Pacific, the economic ties are so strong that even in just a trade war on China, South Korea, Japan, they were forced to show their unity with China, at least on the economic realm, even if they disagree and are hostile on every other front, that they had to come and say, no, we need to actually form stronger bonds with China, because if we don't, we are toast and we are finished. So that is to say that, yes, the U.S. military brass, the United States' political establishment, the ruling elite, those who control foreign policy, they are definitely going as fast and as hard as they can in a period of crisis for the U.S. empire to prepare for a war with China. Whether it can be fought or not is another question. It looks like all of the reality and all the facts says no, but they don't care about this. And this is why the nuclear question then becomes an absolutely imperative to talk about, because that's really where this would go. The war games, all of this are probably not even relevant here, given that unlike Russia, which they were able to, the United States was able to use a so-called sovereign country. Of course, I'm just talking about UN recognition, right? UN recognition, but we know Ukraine is a proxy and puppet of the United States. But in terms of just internationally, international law, the UN Charter, yes, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Ukraine became a sovereign, quote unquote, country. So the United States had far more leverage, far more capacity to do what it did with Ukraine than it does with China. But that doesn't mean that we are not seeing the formulation of a tripwire that could lead to nuclear conflict between the United States and China. And this is why China is so careful and so thoughtful, I think, in its responses to all of this warmongering, because as it prepares to defend itself, it knows that the United States' options are actually very limited here. And thus, we are left to the whims of the very irrational, very aggressive, and historically unhinged, arbiters and rulers over the empire. They don't tend to take defeat or limited options very likely when they want what they want.
It would have to be nukes. I mean, and the reason why I say that is two things. Tripwire is a great way to put it, because at a certain point, the U.S. salami slices, let's say the one China policy, And they establish, let's say they start off at a 10, and then they move to an 8. And then they establish themselves at an 8, and then they move to a 7. And they keep doing that. And so any one slimy slice can be considered, okay, well, we're not going so far as to try to provoke a reaction through China. But if you look at the course of, let's say, 10, 20 years, okay, well, you've moved 6 or 7 rungs on that particular ladder. At some point, you get to, okay, now we're declaring independence, which all hell breaks loose. And I don't know how they fight that war short of it being a nuclear war, which nobody wins. Like, even this notion of bringing aircraft carriers, how do you even get aircraft carriers into the Chinese waters without them being knocked down from China? Even if China doesn't put a boat even in the water, just this notion of hypersonic missiles can knock those things out of the water before they even get close. I don't know how this works short of some kind of nuclear war.
Yeah, and China knows this, and that's why China has been doing what it's been doing for many decades, which is hiding strength and biding their time. That is what China is doing. China is primarily focused on, while it is building this modern military, the United States should be, even though I disagree with all of the Western mainstream media reports that hysterically panics about and tries to stoke fear about China's military capabilities. The reality is exactly as you said, Jamal. Yeah, China does have hypersonic missiles. China is outpacing the U.S. military at this moment on every single front. And it just came out with the largest aircraft carrier maybe ever known to man. There's advanced, jets that have been released. Those that were used in the India-Pakistan conflict. Those are old compared to what China is rolling out now. So, in a big thing that the Wall Street Journal talks about in its latest piece on the widening gap between the U.S. military and the Chinese military is that it's not just military arms. People really get obsessed about the arms to arms comparisons, but it's about the entirety of the production process. It's about the fact that when it comes to, for example, industrial workers, the United States has about 17 million of those, and China has over 160 million of those. So you're talking about China being able to, in a very rapid process, which we saw during COVID, building a hospital in a week, which we've seen in China's rapid development of its technological base and advanced technologies. China has the ability, when it is cornered, when it is threatened, to immediately repurpose its economy for its own needs. And that's why the trade war has failed, because China can find other partners in a very rapid time to buy its goods. That's why the tech war has failed, because China can easily rely on itself if it needs to. Now, of course, there might be some initial problems, but here we've already seen China advance in chip production to such a massive degree in such a short time that now Huawei is building smart cars and 5G cars that can drive themselves. And that's because all of these measures ultimately backfire. The military threats and aggression and attempts to contain China are backfiring as well. And yes, it can only but lead to nuclear war. So China is doing everything it can to avoid this. It is playing a much different game. It is trying to build the world that not only it wants to see, but arguably that the vast majority of the world wants to see, which is a more just and fair world order that prioritizes development, it prioritizes multilateralism, multipolarity over unipolar dominance, full spectrum dominance, and military aggression. This is why China is such a big part of BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. This is why the Belt and Road Initiative is signed on by over 150 plus countries with $1 trillion plus of infrastructure development. This is why Africa, Asia, and Latin America see China not only as their number one trade partner, but really their economic lifeline when the United States is going around the world sanctioning and tariffing anyone that it sees as getting in the way of its own dominance. We are seeing a world that is rapidly changing, and it's actually going in China's favor. So China doesn't have to respond dramatically just yet. But indeed, if the United States tries to violate China's sovereignty to a degree that threatens the interests of the Chinese people and the future of China's economy and its system, then China will respond in kind, and it will be devastating, and it could very well lead to exactly what you are afraid of, Jamal, and what a lot of people, I think, are becoming more increasingly afraid of here and around the world, which is nuclear war.
Nuclear war. One more topic, kind of on this, that's tangential to this. So recently, Donald Trump came out and said, China broke the deal. We destroyed their economy. All of these people were laid off. And then we removed the sanctions. And then China's economy came back. Okay, now he's lying, right? All of this stuff is nonsense. But one of the things he said is China broke the deal. People are like, what are you talking about? What deal is he talking about? So Donald Trump decided to make, which is astonishing when you think about it, to say, well, look, we don't like your AI chips. And so we're going to make those illegal for anybody to use, including you using them, which is nonsense. Like nobody's going to, like the idea that a country is going to say, well, the US doesn't want me to use this, so I'm not going to use it. Okay, those vassals in Europe may. I don't even know if they're that incompetent, where they're willing to do that or that low in their own regard. But he is going with this silly notion that is not true, by the way. This wasn't something that they negotiated. This is something he just came up with. That because China is making these advanced AI chips or technology, that this is supposedly illegal because he says it's illegal, and that other countries, including China itself, using them is somehow off the wall. It is nonsense. But I guess my thing is, that's the other angle to this. Do you think, you mentioned earlier that this notion of the capitalistic economy versus this kind of socialist economy and what they're oriented towards. So the US spends like $1 trillion a year on the military. And I always say, well, there's no way to know the return on investment. Like there's no way to know the bang for the buck for that money, because all of these enterprises that are building things are building these high cost weapons that aren't really tested in a real war, and that you can't really make in numbers sufficient for an actual war. Whereas Russia, of course, they spend like $80 billion a year, but they're outproducing the West threefold, all of the West combined. With China's infrastructure, you can imagine the level of production that they can, if they need to produce, not to mention they have factories, they have industries, they have all of these things. Is that the difference between a capitalistic system versus a socialistic system with quote unquote Chinese characteristics? And I'm asking this not just in the microcosm of economy. If you look at high-speed rail in China, if you look at them building rocket ships that are effectively landing kind of like Elon Musk's rocket ships, if you look at the car industry, you're looking at the bridges, the roads, the high technology country, whereas our country is effectively degrading. You can see it degrade, not just the military, but also in this, like the way in which it eats itself. I mean, our bridges are crumbling. Our roads are trash. We don't have high-speed rail. In fact, trying to get a train from Richmond, Virginia to Chicago is a pain in the ass. I don't even know if they have those going to that route. And from the standpoint of this notion of investing in the country, we just don't do it. We are going after Medicaid right now. The richest man on the planet was destroying and firing workers. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. We're taking nearly $1 trillion out of Medicare in order to put $20 trillion on the debt. Like this stuff just seems like we've gotten to the point where we're so, what's the word I'm looking for? We're eating ourselves. We're carnivoristic. That's not the right word for it, but
cannibalistic.
Cannibalistic, thank you.
Yeah, cannibalistic.
That we're effectively eating ourselves. Whereas China, their philosophy seems to be different. The bang for the buck seems to be there in a way that it's not in the United States.
Yeah, well, I'll maybe make this very simple, hopefully, for those who might be new to the differences in China's economy versus the United States. So if we look at the most important element of an economy right now at this stage of development, it is the role of finance. So in the United States, finance is entirely monopolized and completely in the hands of private interests. In the United States, there's about 5 major banks that essentially control the entire economy in many ways, because one of the big issues for the United States is that it can't actually invest right now because those financial institutions, when they are lending, when they are doing business with major corporations and monopolies, they're doing it in the interest of a return on their investment, a return for their shareholders. And thus, what we have seen and what economists like Michael Hudson have talked about is this huge proliferation of debt. Because what do private banks, what do private lenders really like? Well, they like debt that can accumulate interest where they can get a bigger return on their investment. And this is actually what's happening across the board, even with some of the biggest monopolies. It happens with the weapons contractors. They are in debt to the financial institutions that are telling them, well, here is what we will give you so you can invest in XYZ. That is why this model is so bankrupt, is that the cannibalism is happening actually to the people, because it is the people that suffer the most when the banks are imposing debt on corporations, on people, and stifling investment so that they can get their return. In China, the banks, the financial system is almost entirely, if not entirely, government. It is public. There are no big five private banks in China that operate on the profit motive. Their banks operate on the motive of, well, how do we plan an economy and invest financially in what the government is saying are big priorities? So that is why you can see it in the CSIS reports. You can see it in essentially any economic and military reports on China from the think tanks, think tankistan in the United States. Their biggest issue always is that the United States looks at every single investment as whether it can get a profit from it. If it cannot get a profit from it immediately, it will not do it. And that is why all across the board, the United States is not investing in essentially anything. You mentioned rail. It will not invest in more rail because U.S. corporations and their banks that are essentially controlling investment, they say, well, if we do this, we are going to run at a loss for X amount of years. And that is unacceptable. While in China, they are willing to, the banks are willing to, more than willing, to print the money, to invest in the infrastructure, and then get the returns later. That is the difference. And the returns, of course, are defined differently. It's not just how much money is made back. It's what kind of economy, economic development, what kind of standard of living can be raised for people who once didn't have access to this. I was just in China, and if you look at, for example, the high-speed rail example you were mentioning, and just the idea of transportation in general, you know, I traveled from Shanghai to Wuhan in about 3.5 hours. That is essentially the distance from New York to Chicago, roughly. And I did that in 3.5 hours. And about 350 kilometers per hour, that the max speed of the train. In the United States, if you were to get a similar train, if you can get it, you're going to spend 19 plus hours on the train. You're going to probably make dozens upon dozens of stops. It's actually it's not a solution. You're going to fly. So, and you're going to pay probably, let's see, the tickets for economy class on high-speed rail in China for this particular train, and most of them are about the same depending on region, but about $50 US. But if you are to get a train that far, you're probably going to pay 3-4 times as much as that for a far slower process, actually an unmanageable one. So this is the difference, is that China has invested in infrastructure because they have kept the commanding heights of the economy, those that are most critical for development and for the ability to plan and organize an economy in the interests of wherever you want to go with it. Well, you need the energy, you need the banks, you need the telecommunications, you need these areas to be publicly controlled so that the market cannot simply just determine what the market wants, because what we all know what the market wants. The market wants as much profits as possible, as many profits as possible in as quick amounts of time, and that always leads to, of course, imbalances, inequality, and the problems now we are seeing reach a climax in the United States, a real peak in the United States, which is economic stagnation and, of course, the discontent and mass impoverishment of the majority of people in the U.S. That is really the difference, and it's why we are seeing China really win. When we talk about a war between the U.S. and China, China's actually already won in many respects because it's been able to, under the threats and pressure of U.S. aggression, to actually turn itself into the most successful economy in the world, and one that is quickly shaping up to be the future of the world order. While the United States actually has, through its pursuit of endless aggression, because it wants the banks and it wants its big monopolies to control the entire world and their markets, that has led to actually an exodus away from this world order of unipolarity of the U.S. state. So that's what we're seeing on a huge scale, and it's a path. I think it's a trajectory that we can expect to continue. That is, of course, until the people of the United States determine and decide that they want a different kind of destiny for themselves.
But this radical greed wasn't there prior. I mean, maybe on some level it was, but if you think back, we built bridges, we built skyscrapers, we built subways. We used to build those things. And somewhere along the way, it just was off the table. It became, as you pointed out, how do we make as much money as possible? And having a political institution that is opposed to working for the interests of the public to just insulate itself, basically working for its own interests, where the matters or the, let's say, issues of the public matter less than profit. And not just profit for any particular business. When Donald Trump was over in Saudi Arabia, he was over there making money for certain people. It had nothing to do with us. And even if you look at the money that he's given to Republicans, that $5 trillion, $20 trillion on the debt that they're talking about, we're already $36 trillion in debt. And they're gutting services to do that. That is astonishing. Like, meaning there's a rot in the way our society is functioning in a way that doesn't seem to be the case in China. They have competent leadership. We had Joe Biden, who was out of his mind. We now have Donald Trump, who's out of his mind. Donald Trump was there before, who was out of his mind. Kamala Harris wasn't a viable choice. Like, so our political system's not even churning out competent leaders. Do you think that is a systemic issue? Meaning, it's not the individual leader per se. It's a capitalistic system that functions in a particular way that over the course of time, they've gotten more efficient at, let's say, pulling profit out of that system, even using the political branch to do so. Whereas in China, it's a communist system that effectively rides a capitalist system, meaning they've put a lash on the dog and is riding the dog in order to get as much profit out of it as possible. But civilian public control is still the primary. Whereas in the US, it's not really the case. It's purely profit oriented. And that seems to be unsustainable as a way of in the political affairs of the country.
The United States, of course, since its inception, has always had capital in command. That should be of no surprise to anyone. But of course, for the imperatives, for the imperatives of development, the imperatives of course, social peace, so-called, or social stability, there have been times where capital being in command had to make concessions in order to keep the system relatively stable. For example, we saw this during the so-called Cold War, in and around World War II, where the United States had to massively invest in its industrial base to build it a military-industrial complex, to then also, of course, spread some of those fruits of development to the workers so that they didn't look over at the Soviet Union, for example, and say, hey, I want that. That was a big reason for this so-called golden age that Donald Trump talks about. He doesn't actually reference, well, what was the actual golden age? And let's be honest, the era of William McKinley and the so-called robber barons and all of this, that really wasn't a golden age. I mean, that was the antebellum Jim Crow period. We're not really talking. Of course, it was the advent, in and around that period, the advent of U.S. industry and becoming and leading into the U.S. becoming the industrial powerhouse and the powerhouse of capital and capitalism.
So
but
I think it was the Soviet Union. That's what it sounds like you're saying.
I think it was in order during World War II, of course, when the real golden age for the United States that generations who are still alive today can remember, it was started because the United States, of course, made the Victory Day celebrations happen on May 11th, and a lot of people are very keen on celebrating. And I think, yes, it's great that many more people understand the sacrifices of the Soviet Union during that time, but it also has to be understood that the United States did everything it could to stay out of that war so that it could get out of its own protracted economic crisis that was threatening to sink U.S. capitalism as a whole. You have to remember, this was a long economic crisis. This was one that absolutely had no solution because the robber barons, the bankers, the lieutenants of capital, they didn't want to invest in anything. It just so happened that this war pushed the government to say, okay, well, how about you invest in this? How about we invest in this huge military industrial arsenal that can then have a trickle effect for the rest of the economy, and it can also hopefully then satisfy all of these striking workers, which are not going to stop and may eventually want to see a whole different system if we keep bludgeoning them and destroying them and trying to break their attempts to collectively bargain. So that was really where the golden age of the United States came about. It was because there was this two-pronged crisis of a recession, a depression, and the resistance to it, plus a war. That's really where massive changes for the better have actually occurred under the United States, is when there are these multi-front crises which force capital to do something. But in China, that's not what's happening. There has actually been no recession in China. But China, of course, has its own problems. Opening up and reform, uneven development has been an issue. You know, people talk about unemployment, real estate prices. Yeah, these things are problems that have been partly problems of the market, but of course, just general imbalances with a still developing country and developing economy. However, it does not experience the shockwaves that capitalist economies do. You can't name a period, not even 2008. It was China that saved the United States in 2008 during that economic crisis. You can't name a period since 1949 where an economic crisis of the kind of the Great Depression inflicted upon China. Of course, you can name maybe other crises, right? The Great Leap Forward and Cultural Revolution were different crises for China that might have had temporary negative impacts on the economy as a whole. But overall, China, because it has a planned economy, because its government is in command of the market and in command of development, that means it has a serious advantage of maneuvering crises for the interests of China and to the benefit of the people, which is why it enjoys such widespread trust and support from 90%. The people of China, because they can expect that their lives will get better over the course of time. While the opposite is true here, and I just want to make one more point about that, is that when you talk about this period of, a lot of people say neoliberalism, we have to understand that neoliberalism in this period of shockwave privatization and essentially total warfare of capital against labor and really the world, it has come about in a period where there's been a realization, right? There's a tendency to concentrate when capital is in command. There's a tendency to monopolize. There's a tendency to then seek out profit maximization at all costs. And these factors together have led, yes, to a period where as I said before, investment is seen as a cost, but with profit maximization really being unfettered at this moment, that means that capital itself is, as you said, looking to gobble up everything, to cannibalize everything, except for itself. However, the tendency of capital is actually to monopolize, so that happens anyway. So that's the situation that you get, is you have increasing concentration of wealth in capital on the one hand, and then, of course, all of the problems of that exploding on the other in the United States, in really the world situation. And that's why these wars are looking more desperate. That's why there isn't, people talk about, well, what's the strategy here? Well, it's not a strategy. It's about maintaining and expanding full spectrum dominance so that this system that is lagging and decaying, it can be maintained for in perpetuity. That is what the end of history narrative was about with Francis Fukuyama. Sure. It was about this is it, and everything there's nothing left other than American-led capitalism, and everything and anything will be done to ensure that remains the reality, despite the fact that the entirety of the world, really the world that I think matters the most in terms of where the future of humanity is going, is saying something quite different right now.
Right.
We're seeing that not just with China, not just with Russia, not just with the most vocal and active parts of the multipolar world, but we're seeing it across the global majority in more quieter ways that speak to the U.S.'s own sense of isolation, and really the isolation of an economic system that really can only rely on the most crass and most inhumane, i.e., look at Gaza, the most inhumane forms of suppression and social control in order to keep it going, and that's what we're going to continue to see. So I hope that I hope that we're all paying attention and can all act accordingly as we enter this period of
that goes into the whole
difficult
planter
period.
thing, right? Like this notion of tracking people, and it's like, well, China does it, yeah, but I get the sense it's going to be worse with some of these lunatics. Last question, while I have you here, I'm super interested. Anybody who covers Asia, I'm very interested in the way they view China as a hegemon. Do you think Mearsheimer is right? Mearsheimer has this, I guess you would call it, realistic view of the world, and I don't think it's realistic at all. I think he's so accustomed to the way Western governments have controlled the world, because whether it's the Soviet Union, whether it's the United States, whether it's France, Britain, whatever, they had a very similar mindset in the way that they operated, with fighting one war after the next. And that goes back like thousands of years, that you could just kind of see in the way that they've operated. I think he's looked at that, and from his point of view, okay, this is the way countries act when they become hegemons, when they become this kind of masters of the world. All of them effectively act the same. And so in his mind, well, when China is a hegemon, China is effectively going to act just like the United States, because all hegemons have an interest in maintaining their power and exerting their power on a certain level. Do you agree with him on that? That whether it's the US, whether it's Russia, whether it's pick any random country, the UK, that China would effectively act the same way as the US or any other hegemon, because the material pressures that are on countries when they become or reach that level are effectively the same. People are effectively the same. And so the way they act as countries are effectively the same. Do you buy that premise? I got to be honest, I don't agree with Mearsheimer on this, but what's your take on this? And this is the last question.
Well, I've wanted to have John Mearsheimer on my channel to talk about this. I have not been successful just yet, but because I do respect his work, I think that he has spoken up on important matters in ways that have reached people that might not be reached. However, no, I don't agree with this, and I think both of us have traveled to China. Both John Mearsheimer.
I was only there for 12 hours.
Several times. I know you you got the airport experience, but we've both been to China, and perhaps my focus when I go is just a little different, in that when I go, I'm very interested in what I can observe and what I can learn from China that can tell me something about how both the United States' political foreign policy establishment talks about China, right, versus how the Chinese talk about China. And every time I've gone, I'm only more firmly convinced that the way Chinese people and the way that the Chinese government talks about China is far more accurate than how the U.S. foreign policy establishment talks about China. And so the position that China is going to act once it is powerful enough, just like the United States or the West has over the course of many centuries of their rule as empires, I think negates the fact that China is right now already an economic powerhouse. Despite the fact that it's a developing country, if China wanted to and could, it could make investments and prioritize matters similarly to the United States, which in my estimation would probably collapse and destroy all of China because the people wouldn't allow it. So that I think this is where we have to understand that it's not about how countries, I think geopolitics oftentimes can be mistaken as countries are competing against each other. They're vying for spheres of influence. We've heard this recently in the New York Times, that Trump administration wants to see spheres of influence, the
Nonsense.
Europe and Russia sphere of influence, the Asia sphere of influence with China, and of course the North American sphere of influence. All of this, what I think is nonsense. But the point here is that if we conceive of the world like that, then we would assume that Russia and China, and we can just keep it on China here, operating the same way. But that is not precise. We're not looking at how China fundamentally organizes a society and what are its priorities. For whatever people think of the Communist Party of China, what does the Communist Party of China want? Does the Communist Party of China want to be a warmongering expansionist power that seeks to have China dominate over the rest of the world? Well, if you just read what the Chinese government says, Ray McGovern says all this all the time. He was a CIA analyst who literally read Soviet documents all the time and reported them what they said to the president. Well, you can do the same with China, and you can see what the Communist Party of China wants. It wants development, it wants sovereignty, it is very staunchly and firmly for multipolarity, and it wants to achieve various markers and goals that will uplift the Chinese people, rejuvenate the Chinese nation, as they say, and of course make China a bigger part of a burgeoning multipolar world order. Now, then we can say, well, what is China doing? Is it matching up? If you listen to the U.S. foreign policy establishment, then perhaps you might believe that, well, China is interfering in the South China Sea and it's trying to take Taiwan and it's trying to bully its neighbors, despite the fact that China hasn't fought a war or even had any kind of significant military to military incursion over the past 40 plus years. Right. While the United States has literally been involved in more than 50. So if that's the case, then we can also look at what is China doing proactively to align with its stated objectives. Well, we've talked about it here. We've talked about China's massive technological development, the advances it's making on all fields in that realm, from AI to thorium to all kinds of things, renewable energy. When you go to China, you'll see that electric vehicles dominate the market. It's probably the only place in the world where that's actually true. Yeah. And this is the case for all Chinese cities, and the government is heavily involved in ensuring that people can afford these goods. And we can go across the board, from metro lines, high-speed rail, to the development of 5G technology, on and on and on. And all of that has the result of improving the lives of Chinese people, which is also just easily measured. Mainstream, the UN, various publications have acknowledged that China has indeed raised the standard of living of people in China to the point where it's eliminated extreme poverty. Whatever you think of that, it's good enough or not, you have judgments on it, whatever. But the point is it happened. 800 million people have been lifted out of extreme poverty, and now it doesn't exist in China. If you go to China, you see that actually conditions continue to get steadily better, even as new challenges emerge, whether it's employment, of course, and real estate costs, what have you. But the arc of progress still remains the same. So if that's the case, there's no wars, there's development, prosperity. Why would that change just because China now is becoming the number one economy and will eventually in GDP terms become the number one economy? In fact, China doesn't even have the infrastructure. It has the military arsenal, it has the economy, if it wanted to, theoretically and hypothetically, to become an expansionist power. But then again, what would drive it? What would drive the CPC? What would drive the Chinese people to cheer for that? Well, absolutely nothing. And in fact, China, well, I'm not an expert in Chinese history, but there's a huge move in China to look at 5,000 years of Chinese civilization. The word civilization now is everywhere in the political conversations and dialogue. And of course, you'll see it with this, no matter what city you go to, you'll see this huge push to preserve and to highlight Chinese civilization from its entire history, as well as modernize, kind of side by side. And it's always a very interesting contrast. But nonetheless, then so we have to ask, what would push China to act in the way that the United States does? Well, it would have to have the same push factors that the United States has. It would need a huge monopoly class of warmongers that are seeking maximum profits for weapons manufacturers and Wall Street. It would need to essentially do what the Soviet Union did when it collapsed. It would need to, privatize everything. But we know that when that occurs, actually the system becomes completely unfunctional. So for an economy, so actually there is no route even for China to go in this direction, because history for China is a lot different than history for the United States. China didn't begin as some kind of colonial project that then morphed into a monopoly imperial power. China started from its own thousands of years of civilization, from a place of relative advancement for that period and into its own development process toward modernity. And it never reached a stage where it built the rudiments of a society that is driven by this kind of expansionist motives. So that, I think, is to me where this argument that China will just suddenly become this, it's almost like we have to assume that humans are driven by this lust for power that can just be snapped and changed in an instant, when in fact what actually drives human beings, what actually drives society, is what conditions they are confronted with in front of them, and that ultimately shapes how they behave. Now, China doesn't necessarily want zero power. It doesn't want no influence. However, the way it defines influence, the way it defines what it means to be a bigger power, what it means to be an influential country, is just different than how the United States sees it. The United States sees military power, dominance, the ability to dictate terms to other countries, etc., as the measures and hallmarks of power. China sees the ability to cooperate, to have everybody win together, to be able to develop as fast and as efficiently and with specific goals in mind for yourself as a big part of this, as well as how well can you, and we see this in terms of China's behavior, sometimes to the point of criticism. People criticize China. Why don't you intervene here? Why don't you be stronger there politically, diplomatically, militarily? And it's because China sees as a huge imperative non-interference, the ability to not interfere in the affairs of others, countries, and peoples is a huge priority for China. And why? Because China has a long history of what it means for that to happen to them. And they know that interference can often lead to misunderstanding, can often lead to destruction of society, of culture, of economies, of development itself. So there is I guess if we are to look at this hypothetically, we would need to see a counter-revolution in China for any kind of expansionist and imperialistic ways of looking at the world to emerge. But I would argue that that kind of counter-revolution is impossible, because a counter-revolution in China would really be the ruin of China. It would destroy its capacity to use what it has developed, all of these advancements. It would destroy that capacity, because China isn't built and organized in a way that would lead that capital can just take hold of it and run. No, we saw that the Soviet Union, when capital defeated the Soviet Union, when the United States and the Western powers defeated the Soviet Union, when the Soviet Union collapsed on itself, what happened? The Soviet Union became worse than a junior partner. It became a basket case. It was totally decimated. It was divided. It was cut up, and it was destroyed. That's the plan, actually, for the United States. The Zhang Weiwei, the renowned professor of Fudan University, who I've had the privilege of interviewing, he says that the Thucydides trap is not just, it's absolutely not a fact. That China is not going to fall into this trap of dominating for dominating's sake, like the United States, just because the United States is treating it in a certain way, because the consequences that China would have to bear for that are just too big. So in short, it is just a completely different context that can't be compared in this way. And if that day were to come where that was possible, man, I don't even know. I don't think we're going to be alive. I don't know we're looking at a future that we just cannot possibly even predict anywhere close. So
Danny,
no,
that
I
is a
don't
fantastic point.
I don't agree with it, but at the same time, it's understandable that one would think this if we are to look at the development of societies, of geopolitics, of conflict itself
Through a Western
as
lens.
of a Western lens, but one that says, well, power corrupts absolutely, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and if anybody is on top, that must mean the way they get there is by suppressing and making people suffer below them. China's model has actually shown that's not true. It hasn't fought the wars. It's not, it's not expanding. It has a big military that's not fighting anybody. It has an economy that is almost entirely self developed with the help, of course, of the market. But at the same time, this is China's project. China has not been exporting this anywhere, and there's no proof that China's been exporting this anywhere beyond helping countries build the things that they need for them to develop themselves. And that's why we see the world moving more toward China, is because the reality is that the world already sees China far differently than how the United States sees it. And this whole idea that China is going to just flip a switch and start dominating them just because it's at the top of the economic period I think just not with any substantial or any evidence really at all.
I so agree with you. That's a great breakdown, by the way. I mean, he is looking at this purely through a Western lens. Well, this is what Napoleon did. This is what the Brits did. This is what America did. What would the Soviet Union do? And even for the Soviet Union, they were true believers. Like the United States just thought, okay, well, that's just their ideological, this is BS. They're just using it for political gain. But when you listen to and look at the records of what they were saying, they fully believed it, meaning ideology does play a role in how countries act and respond in the larger world. And to your point, part of the reason that the U.S. behaves in the way it does is because of the capitalistic system. It's, hey, there are resources in the country I want to get my hands on. There's a business interest I want to get my hands on. I want to break that country up in order to get my hand on, so forth. I need to overthrow that government, meaning the motivation is being done by effectively people who want to make more cash and get their hand on resources. It's driven. It drives a certain ideology in the way that the U.S. behaves in a way that China is not driven by those same things. You're perfectly right. It wasn't a settler colonial state. It didn't evolve in that way. Their ideology is different. And one last point. I don't know if you've ever read Three Body series. I'm a sucker for that series. That series is fantastic. But one of the things that the Chinese author of that book talks about history in the scope of thousands of years, which is hard for Americans to wrap their head around because our president is like 4 years. And the country is so young. We're talking about like a 300-year-old country. 5,000 years of history is mind-boggling. But that's the way they look at time. And that's the way they even plan stuff out, like 100 years. And so in the book, that comes through in the way that they're talking about like a philosophy or a governmental structure that goes over the course of the arc of time. Same thing with Wandering Earth, same thing. This notion of thousands of years of continuity in regards to the way a government functions. But one of the things they were talking about was resist hegemony. Oh, I thought that was astonishing, right? And, China is in Thucydides' trap. It's just not China by itself. China, Russia, Iran, all these countries are effectively running up against the way that the U.S. is behaving and trying to have this kind of full spectrum dominance. I don't think there's any way out of that trap. You're just kind of stuck with the results, just trying to prevent a larger conflict. Danny, man, fantastic breakdown. Fantastic breakdown. Thank you for this. I've heard people give their take on this. That was probably one of the best explanations. Logical, it made sense. It got to kind of the nub of, well, what is China's motivation and why is it their motivation as compared to what is the U.S. motivation and why is it their motivation? And how does that produce a larger outcome in the grand scheme of things? I agree with you. I don't know what that looks like for China to just all of a sudden become an expansionist country. And I don't even know why they would do it, considering their model. Don't get me wrong, they may throw their weight around, but I don't get the sense that they're trying to overthrow government is to steal resources. That's not the way they function. Danny, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate this. I honestly do. Danny Haiphong, journalist, geopolitical analyst. You can find him on Twitter at GeopoliticsDH, on YouTube at Geopolitics Haiphong. Danny, where else can people find you, by the way?
Well, people can, if they are able, they can go to Substack and Patreon. All these have free options now, thankfully. But if you're able to contribute, you can go to Patreon, Substack. Just look up. You can go to any one of my videos and find the handle Chronicles of Haiphong on Substack and just my name on Patreon. But any one of my videos will have all the ways that you can follow and support me. But really, social media, X is the best place. I'm not as active on there anymore. YouTube is really where I do all of my work. So definitely follow me there. As you said, Jamal, Geopolitics Haiphong is the handle, or just look at my name, Danny Haiphong, and you can find that channel. Subscribe and watch the videos. And yeah, thanks so much, Jamal. It was really great to be here. Hopefully we can do it again soon.
Absolutely. I hope so. I hope this wasn't too much of a pain. I would love to have you back. So I'm just putting that out there now. Thank you for this. I really do appreciate it. You have a good one, okay?
Yeah, you too.
By the way, what part of the country do you live in? Just so I know.
I'm in New York. I'm in New York, so I'm Eastern time.
Oh, you're in New York. Okay, so you're on the Eastern Coast. Okay. You have a fantastic evening, man. Be safe.
All right, you too.
Danny Haiphong, definitely appreciate it. I have been trying to get him on the show for a while because he's a damn good guest. I greatly appreciate him coming on, and I'm hoping this interview wasn't too much of a pain, so he would be glad to come back. But we have come to the end. Let's see. There's one more. I've read all the chats. I was diligent. I read all of them earlier today. Let's go for the last two that I missed. Reynold Cherry. Off topic for the end, what do you think of the chess upset yesterday? I saw that Magnus Carlsen losing to 19-year-old, the Indian guy. I think Carlsen is overrated. I've always thought Carlsen was overrated. This may be me getting old and thinking of the way, for me, Jordan was the greatest basketball player of all time. And yet you have some kids who grew up who think LeBron is the best of all time. Okay, well, I think they're other than mine. I think Jordan, the level of intensity, the level of, if it's 20 seconds on the clock, I'll take Jordan any day of the week and twice on Sundays to take that ball. If I need somebody to lead a team, I'll take Jordan any day of the week and twice on Sundays. He had a level of intensity, skill that wasn't just great for him, but he made his team better. I guess my point is, I hope I'm not doing that when I'm saying Magnus Carlsen is overrated. Garry Kasparov, for all of his trash political opinions, and the Lord knows they are trash, his skill at that game was something I've never seen before. And I know we're talking about Carlsen. I'm just trying to make the point. Garry Kasparov stayed dominant for 20 years. Well, he might have lost maybe 2 or 3 games over the course of 20 years. He hit 2,800 when everybody else was mulling around at 2,600. That's how strong and dominant he was over the chess field over his tenure playing chess. The level of complexity of his games are like nothing I've ever seen. Bobby Fischer was a very strong player, but he was a very straightforward player. His moves were good, uncomplicated, and strong. And you can understand what you're watching when you're looking at a Bobby Fischer game because he's very strong. If you're looking at Mikhail Tal, for example, Mikhail Tal, one of the best attackers you would ever find in your life. And his ability to go into play world champions and play in the way that he played is just mind-boggling that he could get away with that shit. But he was that good, right? The way he would put people in these positions where everything is just going haywire. And you have choices. Now, if you were a computer, you eat them alive. But people aren't computers. And you have all of these options that you can't see through. And maybe he can't even see through them. But he is pursuing a vicious course of attack that puts pressure on people in the way that he would go after people in those games. He was able to win the world championship playing that way. The man was astonishing. Smoke, drunk, had kidney issues. Best attacker you could find. But Kasparov was one of the most dominant players. somebody like Karpov or somebody like Petrosian, for example, had these amazing positional games. These type of games where there is this intuitive aspect to the game of strangling a person to death on a board. And I know people don't fully get this, but when you're playing, you feel that stuff. Like when your position is trash, you feel it. It's almost like there's a sense organ in you. I don't know how other people experience it. I feel it. And there's an intuitive element to the game when you're playing, especially if you're playing blitz. And somebody like Tal, Petrosian, even Bodnovic to a certain degree, but Bodnovic was more technical in the way that he played the game. They would strangle a player to death, meaning I am preventing you from accomplishing your objective. I'm preventing you from doing this. And once I've prevented you from accomplishing your objectives, then I'll accomplish mine. It is an infuriating way to play, but effective. Kasparov was a different animal. He was a different animal. If you're ever interested in seeing one of the best world championships, Karpov versus Kasparov, oh, it was fantastic. Fantastic. There's so much drama and politics that was built in chess going back to the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, that you could make a channel just on the drama alone. Alekhine, for example, being stuck in Germany, started working for the Germans, talking about Germany, had the best chess players because they were supermen and all of this other nonsense, and then being ostracized in the community afterwards. But again, fantastic, astonishingly good player. And you go through the history with these guys, people being picked up on trains because they have chess notation and they thought it was spies because of the chess notation, in which case they take them to the back and, have questions. The drama between Karpov and Kurochi, where the Soviets do all of these dirty tricks in the game between the two because they wanted Karpov to win. And so there was one guy who was sitting at the front row just staring at Kurochi the entire game, and it was freaking him out. And he was like, yo, this guy's trying to hypnotize me. Russia or Soviet Union has been doing work in these kind of psi techniques. And so I am not playing another game until you get that guy back off. Not to mention his wife, kid was stuck in the country, so he was concerned about that. Like, all of this stuff is just drama. And then you get the last game of the series where the guy is right back on the front row, just staring the entire game. Just so that this stuff is fantastic. Kasparov was a different animal. I've never seen anybody play that way. The level of complexity of those games was astonishing. Magnus Carlsen is not Kasparov. And so Kasparov was the best player in the history of the game, full stop. Carlsen is a strong player, but he doesn't dominate in the way that Kasparov dominated. So for Magnus Carlsen to be talking trash and then get his ass kicked and then has a temper tantrum after getting his ass kicked, okay, that breaks form. You can't do that. Shake the man's hand, tell him good game, call it a day. You were humiliated. But that's even more humiliating. One of the first things that I learned in the barbershop when I used to play, shake the man's hand, tell him a good game. Don't get pissed off. Don't get upset. Don't cry. Don't do anything. Shake the man's hand, tell him a good game. It's part of it. It's the tradition that you need to abide by. So yeah, poor form for Carlsen. Sad day for Carlsen. Anybody can get beat. And Carlsen, I don't know why he thinks his powers are so dramatic over everyone else. He doesn't dominate the field in the way that Kasparov dominated the field. He can be touched. And in being touched, he got touched by a 19-year-old Indian kid yesterday and didn't handle it well. So yeah, poor form for Magnus Carlsen. Very poor form. His behavior was atrocious on that. Super sticker. NZ, what is that, New Zealand? Ian Moon. Thank you, Ian Moon. Let's see, I think I read this one. May E82, May 30th, Biafra Remembrance Day, as we honor our heroes that fought to protect the Igbo, I believe that's called, people through genocide committed by Nigeria. Was a total loss of 5 million people. Jesus Christ, the number is astonishing. If Security Council does not remove Putin in a very short time, Russia is making a big mistake. Putin is no longer the man for the job. Again, I just so disagree with that. I so disagree with that. Look, we talked about it with Mark, so I'm not going to rehash. I would just say, if you're not, I guess I'll take it to a chess analogy. If you and I are playing chess, and I have an idea of what I want to accomplish, and it's a strategic objective, meaning there's skirmishes and everything else. But these skirmishes may not affect my strategic objective. And so I may lose a piece. I may lose a pawn. But if your king is trapped in a corner, what does it matter, right? The objective is the king. The objective is not this other stuff. I think for us, it's just unsatisfying. For one, we know how this war started. We know that Russia did everything it can to avoid it. We know that it was effectively provoked. We know that the government was overthrown. We know that Putin was standing out there like a preacher begging people to come to Jesus for a new security architecture, and they wouldn't do it. And as Danny pointed out, part of the rationale for them not coming to a deal, if you notice, they used to have more respect for the Soviet Union. When the government collapsed, I think from their point of view, we no longer have to respect you. You are a collapsed political entity, and we don't believe, nor do we believe that you can do anything about what we're doing. And so Russia had to take its respect at the barrel of a gun. I guess I'm pointing out, if Putin accomplishes its strategic objectives, which he is, it's unsatisfying. That's all. It's deeply unsatisfying. You could still go with those strategic objectives and blow shit up and do so definitively. The catch, as Mark pointed out, and I told you what Mark was going to say, is it's not one-dimensional. You're also in a situation where you're trying to prevent a larger war. Now, the catch becomes, is a larger war coming anyway? And not just is a larger war coming anyway, does NATO really have the hard power to get involved into a conflict in Ukraine? Is that? I don't think they do. And because I don't think they do, then yeah, I think you should be more aggressive in prosecuting this war. And even if they did, I think you should be more aggressive in prosecuting this war. They take your weakness or your pragmatism for weakness. Okay, fair enough. But again, all of that is within the context of not changing anything that affects the strategic aims that you're trying to accomplish, which even the Ukrainians at this point on the battlefield are in a panic. It took them 15 months, 18 months to get a drop of blood. 8 airplanes or 9 airplanes. I think Mark said he saw 4, but let's say there are 10 airplanes out of a fleet of what, 150, 200? And it took you 18 months to do it. Can you really replicate that? The more interesting question is whether those trucks came out of Finland or was one of those NATO nations. And what should be the response if they did? Like, that stuff gets very hairy. NATO is being very provocative. And they are dependent upon Putin's pragmatism to balance out their provocative behavior. And the fact of the matter is, the pragmatism needs to check that door. I could be wrong. Again, if it was me, I'd be probably in a larger war right now. Please try to get Andre. I will try. Look, I've tried to get a lot of these people. My channel is apparently not big enough for them. They don't have an interest. Or I am not somebody who they want to talk to. It could be all 3 of those. It could be one of those. It could be something else. But usually when I try to get them, they tell me no. I'll try. Dmitry Orlov. The name is familiar. But Andrei Martinyanov, him, I know. Him, I do know. There's another guy, Chaz Freeman. Chaz Freeman is one of the best geopolitical analysts that I've come across. He's fantastic. The way he explains some of the stuff that's taking place around the world, he clearly knows what he's talking about. He's measured. He's not screaming that Russia's going to nuke Ukraine, no stupid stuff like that. He's not screaming that the war is going to be over in 2 days, nothing like that. He gives succinct, well-reasoned analysis based on observable reality and based on his experience as a diplomat. I have wanted him on this show for God knows how long. I reached out to him. He was very polite in telling me no. It sucks. I'll try. Crown Heights, Brainiac. Trump needs to pop up picture book. Yeah, I know. That's so sad. Intel brief with Flying Board needs to have a scene. Look, if Flying Board wants to give me super chats, God bless Flying Board for giving me super chats. That's what those chats are there for. Flying Board, though, forgive me. I am not going to go through all these again. I read all of these once before. And so I'm going to live off that. It says, are we allowed to say that Trump is battling his intrusive thoughts to oppose Israel? Intrusive thoughts, my ass. Donald Trump is not opposing Israel. He's on the same page with Israel, either be it on the issue of Iran or for that matter on the issue of Gaza. If you remember, the humanitarian organizations that stopped going in because Donald Trump was basically supporting a genocide and helping Israel to support that genocide. Israel decided to starve the population. Trump backed them and starved the population. Trump sent his goon to the ICJ to argue that Israel has a right to starve 2.2 million human beings and starve babies to death. They've been burning kids alive with US weapons and US support. So when all of these starving people come to get something to eat, and then Israel opens fire on a bunch of starving people, Donald Trump is the one that helped set that up. Or at the very least, Trump commissioned somebody to set that up. So this idea that he's battling his intrusive thoughts to oppose Israel, what the hell ever. They're on the same page. The entire point is to ethnically cleanse that region and to steal that region. Look at what Wickoff is doing, right? Wickoff goes, makes a deal. They announce the deal. Israel changes the deal. Wickoff gives the new deal to Hamas. Hamas is like, whoa, this is the opposite of what we talked about. And then Wickoff says, Hamas's fault. Okay, well, if that's your model, then that's the way the Trump administration thinks. The only reason they're negotiating with Russia right now is because they're winning. And I get the feeling, unfortunately, that Iran is going to have to take their respect at the barrel of a gun. If they start blowing planes out the sky, they will get the respect that they've demanded. A sovereign country. Hell, from my point of view, they should have already built the bomb by now. But again, I tend to be more aggressive on this notion of defense. I am a lefty. I am anti-war, but I'm pragmatic. And I'm a firm believer in knowing your enemy. Look, I'll tell you this and I'll close it. When I was growing up, I had two very good examples of reality and people. I had a mom who would give you the shirt off her back, even to her own detriment. In which case, to balance yourself and what you believe is right, you have to be willing to say no. Meaning there's certain people who, when you're dealing with, because of the way they are and the way they relate to the world, they either need to be protected or you need to be able to not accept something that they're giving. Protected in the sense of, naivety is not the right word for it. Not doing things that are in their best interest for various reasons that shouldn't ultimately matter. But in the other sense, to be able to say, no, that is not in your best interest, even though I may want it. me wanting it matters less than you having it for yourself. And then I had other family members that was the opposite, that selfish, petty, argumentative, wanted things their way. And for those people, you can't give them shit. You have to fight tooth and nail to not give an inch. Because if you give an inch, they'll take a mile. It's the way they think. And so you get these two examples where you realize, oh, right, you have people who function in different distributions. And you, trying to figure out where your center is, have to be able to balance yourself between these various factors around the globe. That's not what Trump is doing. That's not what he's doing. I mean, he's petty, vindictive. Yeah. All right, I'm going to end this. I think I got lost in my thoughts on that one. I'm going to end it. I have another damn good show for you tomorrow. Brian Berletic. Oh, in fact, I need to hit him up. Who else did I have on the show for tomorrow? Brian Berletic. I think Daniel Lazar. He's going to be talking about I forgot what Daniel's coming on to talk about. Oh, Georgia. So the Georgian president or prime minister pointed out that NATO tried to get him to open up a second front against Russia and went so far as to threaten EU membership, went so far as to effectively use NGOs and all of these other groups to try to overthrow the government. And if you've noticed, that was the pressure that was being applied to the Georgian government, where this French spook, the president, who was no longer president, did everything in her power to effectively fuck over her responsibilities, ethical and legal, to the country that she was president, despite being a French spy, to overthrow the government, the legitimate government of that country, with, again, the idea of opening up a second front. Part of the reason that the Romanian election, that I don't believe for a second is a legitimate election, they cheated in that election. Carlo Gauguescu was supposed to win that election. They canceled that election. And even the secondary guy, the chances of him losing that, despite the fact that supposedly he lost, are just astronomical, right? So no, this notion of Romanian democracy is a laughable prospect right now. But understand the reason that they worked so hard to keep Carlo Gauguescu and what is his name, Simon, is it Martin? Martin Simon? To keep him out has to do with the military base that they wanted to build in Romania. And so the notion of having a democratic upswing was off the table for Romania because they wanted that military base in the country. So Georgia was pointing out that they effectively had did the same thing to Georgia, using everything in their power in order to overthrow the Georgian government, to get Georgians to feed themselves to the Russian military, opening up a second front. And then they're bitching about North Korea. All right, guys, shout out to all of the audience that's here. Charles G, Faye Lou, John, I think that's Sultry, Cherie. By the way, Cherie, I think that was your email about artwork. I am damn open to getting it. One catch, because of where I am, there's no way for me to get it and transport it. So for the last 6 months, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June, Jesus, 7 months. For the last 7 months, I've been living out my suitcase. Initially, I was in the States in Airbnbs, but when you do that, I pretty much had to throw everything away. Basically, my life was tossed. And I wasn't sure what was going to happen with the negotiations with the Trump and Russia stuff. And so my thought was, all right, maybe the network comes back. You don't want to settle down in Richmond because you don't know what's going to happen in the future. So float a bit and give it a chance to see what happens. that also means that you can't take that stuff with you. And at the time, financially, I was fucked. It's very expensive to live in Washington, D.C. And so when the network went belly up, it went belly up overnight. So it was like you walk in, yeah, you're no longer getting a paycheck here. Sorry, this is your last day. It was that. And so there was no prep. There was no secondary revenue. It was just stopped on the dime. Still had to pay rent, still had to pay car note, still had to pay, meaning you had to pay for all of the stuff that you had to cover in DC, and you had to do so for several months after without any sort of paycheck. And you had to do it unemployment paid virtually nothing. I mean, the amount unemployment paid, I think I made normally in one day. And so you had to pay all it. All those were hard costs that you effectively had to get hit with. And that took place month after month. And then at the point where you finally unravel and you say, okay, I need to figure out what to do. Another month, another month, another month. So for those, at least the first 4 or 5 months, it was just fuckery. It was complete fuckery. My point is, I was living out of my suitcase. And I was like, okay, I can't keep this up. I need to find a way to, at the very least, find balance where I'm not losing and my account is not just being destroyed, which is why I ended up in Albania, because rent in Albania was $350 as compared to $1,800 in the States. Got rid of the car. With the car went car insurance. Transportation was cheaper. Life just became cheaper. And so that worked in order to create a balance. And then moving to Malaysia for this same idea. Cheaper creates a balance. It's been, it's fuckery. But I guess my point is things have leveled out, thankfully. And in leveling out, the question is now what? I need to figure out what I'm going to do. And if you, it's getting late, and I think I'm getting spacey. My point is, because I'm in Malaysia, I'm living out of my suitcase, so it's going to be hard to take any artwork with me. I will give you an address for my mom's place. At some point, I will be going back to the States. I'm not living in Malaysia. I'm only going to be here for 2 or 3 months. But when I get back to the States and I finally get an apartment somewhere where I'm going to build a life where I can be stationary, I would definitely use it. So I got your email, Lisa. I think it was you in the email. I'm going to respond to that email, and I'll give you the necessary address for you to ship the artwork to. And thank you for that, by the way. I know this is a bare wall, and I'll try to find something to get it, but whatever I get, it's going to have to stay here. It's already a pain in the ass to try to tote my lights, cameras, computers, all the stuff has to go with me anywhere I go. And so trying to add artwork to it or anything else to it is just, it's a no-no. Got to travel light. Less is more. Got to travel light. I have Kuala Lumpur down pat for you, bro. We'll be down there in late August. Will you, Douglas Miller? Will you? Kuala Lumpur is nice. It doesn't have bacon, which sucks. Like, oh man, diet is wild. Every place you go, they have different foods, depending on how drastic of a change. Albania's pizza was really good. But the entire point of the trip was to cut expenses. So didn't eat out. My entire day was spent working. I'd have to go to the clinic, and that was it. I spend maybe 8 or 9 hours a day doing the show, cutting the videos, preparing for the next show. And by that time, it was 1 a.m, maybe later, 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night. Here, it's even worse. I finish up, it's maybe 3 a.m. And then you rinse and repeat. That has been rough. That has been rough. Nevertheless, I chose to make this trip. All the shit was on me. And so nothing is changing in regards to the time of the show. It stays the same. When I get back to the States, oh, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt. All right, guys, I'm going to end this because at this point I'm just rambling. You all have a fantastic day. Fantastic. What's left of your day, I should say. And I will see you bright and early tomorrow morning. Jamal Thomas Morning Show, episode 166. We've done this 166 times. Wow. Just think, at the radio station, they didn't think I could pull the show off by myself. Didn't think I could do it. I don't blame them entirely. If I got ill, if I got sick, if I got hit by a car, then you want somebody else to take over. But I've done this 166 times. And I'm pretty sure I can do it for another 166 more. Is what it is, right? You guys have a fantastic day. And I'll see you guys bright and early tomorrow. Brian Berletic, Daniel Kovalik, and Daniel Lazar. Kovalik is going to hit the HDS thing. There was a report in Washington Post that HDS was cannibalizing itself potentially. You know, the head chopper, jihadist leader, is trying to normalize with Israel. And he claims Israel and him have the same enemies, despite the fact that Israel has been bombing shit out of Syria and has been the only person bombing the shit out of Syria, only country. But whatever, he wants to make nice with them. Also, the ethnic cleansing thing, apparently some of them want more free reign to have quote unquote Sharia law. And there's divisions that have started to spring up among the group itself. And Walpole is talking about this belief that they may end up in a civil war. Well, okay, it's not really a civil war, is it? It's a war among jihadists. There's a question of whether or not the U.S. is manipulating this. Now, yeah, they shook Jelani's hand and all of this other good stuff, but the reality of it is, are they really going to let a head chopper stay in charge of Syria? Or do they want geopolitical expansion by Israel with an excuse of it's unstable, so we have to take more territory for a buffer zone? If you want your greater Israel, part of it is going to have to go through Syria. And having a head chopper being in charge of it with an unstable government may be a rationale. By the same token, they've gotten rid of sanctions. And part of the reason they got rid of sanctions was for obvious reasons. They were destroying the Syrian government with sanctions. And so in trying to remove them, the thought is, okay, now we want to stabilize the situation in Syria because our head chopper, jihadist, CIA spook is now in charge. The world is great. And so let's help him stabilize. But the fact of the matter is, it may not matter. The people who he bought into Syria, these jihadi dogs that he bought in, these animals are not motivated by the economy. These animals are motivated by this kind of, whack job religious movement. In which case, what they care about is through a religious context, not necessarily economic context. The economic context might be for the betterment of the population. So I'm not saying that they shouldn't remove sanctions. They should have never put them on in the first place. I'm saying that the groups in power that have been empowered by HTS may not be motivated by this notion of economics. They may be motivated by this notion of creating a caliphate. And if that's true, they may cannibalize themselves. They may eat themselves in some kind of conflict. Not to mention Israel, who's been bombing Latakia, seems to be, they're acting as if there's some kind of distance between Jelani and the dogs that he rode in on, despite the fact that Jelani was a head chopper himself and leader of ISIS. And so the papers are just bizarre in America in the way they talk about him and acting like there's some kind of division or separation between him and his other dogs. There's not. The ethnic cleansing campaign that was taking place, they're acting like, oh my God, he didn't want to do that. Dude, we said that that was exactly going to happen when they took over Syria, and that is exactly what happened when they took over Syria. That didn't say it because we wanted to say it. And the bombing of Latakia is effectively opposition. And so Israel is bombing his opposition that was fighting back against the ethnic cleansing when the ethnic cleansing was taking place, especially when it got to the border regions. It's just wild. It's just very wild. All right. Daniel Kavalik is going to discuss that tomorrow. That's going to be a really good segment. I'm going to have a damn good show for you tomorrow. You guys have a fantastic day. I'll see you tomorrow. Signing off.